Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis Star Wars. I'm Rutty4, this is Grey Jedi 91.
Hey guys.
This is Evan Nova 95.
Hello.
This is Jen Sarai 1.
Hello, YouTube.
And this is Antoine Bandele.
Hello.
Take us away with the explanation for what we're covering today, Matt.
Okay, so we're getting back into Star Wars. We're going to be reviewing the entire Dark Lord trilogy, which includes the books Labyrinth of Evil, Revenge of the Sith novelization, and Dark Lord Rise of Darth Vader. We're starting with Labyrinth of Evil because let's just get chronological with it, I guess. And we're doing it in three parts. This is part one, and we sort of drew the lines ourselves where to stop, right, Antoine?
Yeah,
So we're going through the first 18 chapters this episode.
yeah, it's like basically like the first third and second, and then last third.
All of these books are fairly long, and there's a lot of detail to cover. So we just want to keep everything, exact.
Mm-hmm. And so this first part, chapters 1 through 18, sort of deals with kind of a, I don't know, I guess like a scavenger hunt of sorts, where the Jedi sort of try to piece together some clues that will allow them to ferret out the mysterious Sith Lord Darth Sidious. And they're finally doing their job, and kind of getting onto his trail.
Actually being proactive.
Yeah.
Talking.
Yeah. And it largely, this book as a whole serves as a prelude to the events of Revenge of the Sith. So that this is like the part one of that prelude, I guess. So we're going to start off with general impressions of the book. Who wants to take that away?
Well, like Matt just said, the entire point of this first book was to be a direct prequel to Revenge of the Sith. In fact, that was a big portion of the novel's marketing. And I think just viewing it through that lens, I actually think it stands up pretty well. It does set the stage for the events that lead into the movie. In fact, you could literally read this book and then go watch the movie, and the events feed into each other just instantly. I mean, the Battle of Coruscant is literally how this book ends. Spoilers. So I think on that merit, it does exceed really, really well. Also, character development wise, again, it sets up the characters of the film fairly thoroughly. You get backstory on Grievous. You get to learn how the Separatist Council works and all that. So I don't necessarily think it is the best written of the trilogy. In fact, if I'm being honest, I do think it is the lowest point in the trilogy. But I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just compared to what comes after it, this one stands out as being a little bit lower. But I still think it is highly enjoyable. Okay.
It may not be as good as the later ones, but in a way that's kind of a good thing because it's kicking off the trilogy. So from here, it's up and up.
Yeah. I guess that's a good point. You don't want to aspire to your worst point, like good to get that point out of the way.
Yeah.
Not that this is bad. Not that this is bad, though.
Yeah, definitely. It lays the groundwork for like you said, the film and the continuation of this particular trilogy. It kind of dives into the psyche of Anakin. We get some of the foundation and the setup for why we should really care about what comes next. The relationships between Anakin and the rest of the people around him, the setting of the galactic stage, both on the war front and the political, because that's very important to kind of appreciate the sort of severity and dramatic impact of what's to follow. And I think that's why this book works so well, because it gives you a light kind of summation of what you need to know before you continue with both the film and the rest of the trilogy.
I agree with that. I also, for me, the thing I appreciate the most about the book, aside from the fact that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the original, this is the first time we got Grievous's backstory in its entirety. It's the first time I heard about it anyway. Anybody else?
Same for me.
There was the Visionaries comic, but I think that came
referencing.
later.
Oh, it was later.
Okay.
Yeah. The Visionaries comic. Did that come later?
I thought it might have been before, and that's what he was referencing throughout the book. But it's very possible that it came after. So
could have been. I mean, they were definitely released in very close succession to each other. So either way.
In any case, it's the first time I experienced that as a Star Wars fan, so it's near and dear to me for that reason. But also, again, like I kind of mentioned this early on, the Jedi are doing their job in this book, and I really enjoy that. I like watching the Jedi be proactive and also seeing like the sort of the fruits of their labor. This isn't an exercise in complete futility. Like they are actually getting somewhere, and it's rewarding. Even though you kind of, whenever you tell a prequel, you sort of suffer from the fact that the audience knows what's going to happen in the end. But this adds flavor, this adds nuance, and it makes sense of a lot of smaller details that had been bothering me before I read it. So that's my biggest pro of this book.
You could definitely throw this book at anyone who tries to say, throw shade at the Jedi for being blind,
Yeah,
Right.
to the point
They
that
were
it acts as a
corrected for a
defense.
bit,
Yeah,
yeah.
to the
Yeah.
point that it acts as a defense against that argument. And, full stop. Some of the things get raised. I've made a few notes throughout the chapters on that. What do you think, Antoine, overall for this book?
And just because we have the internet, the Visionaries run for Grievous was 3 months after this. So
Interesting.
Ah,
Yeah,
so it's
it was
it's
like-
a set up for action then.
it could be that they were both, because the Clone Wars multimedia project, which is this is a part of, was all connected in that way, and they are referencing like the same outlines and guidelines. So it's very possible that story was just like in there somewhere, and then they were like, "Oh, we both want to like mention it," and they both did it similar times. And then comic books take longer. But anyway, the thing that I liked most about this book was getting into the psyche of Grievous, because even from the micro series where I was introduced to him, he's really just a scary monster. In that you don't really see the genius of him being an actual general, and being a genius not because he just is a Jedi killer, but that he's actually effective in combat, and in large scale battle combat, that kind of situation. And I also like the stuff with Anakin and Obi in particular, but I'm not so much a fan of like, even though it's cool that it was there and that it is like deleted scene material, the loyalist stuff with Bail Organa and Amidala and all that kind of stuff was in there, but that's stuff that I didn't care as much for. So I'm probably the one who favors this book the least out of this group, possibly, from what it sounds like so far. It's definitely Revenge of the Sith, the thing that I always try to get to via this book. I'm like, can I just like get to the one that I actually like care for, and then get to the other one that I actually like as well, being a Dark Lord at the end of this trilogy. So yeah, that's my take.
It's interesting because you said you did. We'll get to it when we cover the chapter specifically, but you mentioned you weren't a big fan of the Bail Organa kind of loyalist committee stuff. I loved that. I love the fact that it gave us some more flavor and depth towards that kind of mini faction, and how
I like
how
it
the Senate is
conceptually.
operating.
Like when you say that, you're like, oh yeah, I like to hear about it, but like the actual pieces of it, like they don't interest me as a reader.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get to that today when we cover that specific chapter then. But with overall kind of summation of our thoughts covered, do we want to jump straight into the chapter points, guys?
Yeah, it's funny that you guys were mentioning that you like that the Jedi are actually doing their jobs and being proactive. Because as I've said before, I think the movies should have taken a different kind of timeline where it shouldn't have started in Phantom Menace, or they could have like just found Anakin, but then like gotten straight to the Clone Wars like as a second movie. And I feel like this would have worked very well as like a second half to the second movie leading into Revenge of the Sith.
I totally agree.
Also because New Gunray too, like you have like a lot of overlap from the previous, like if you did Phantom Menace or like some version of that, a shortened version of that, you have the carryover of those characters. You have more insight into Grievous, because if you just watch Revenge of the Sith like blindly, like from episode 2,
Grievous just
like,
kind of pops up out of nowhere,
and you're
he's,
like, who
he's
is
just a throwaway
that's
villain.
about it.
right. But then if you have a story like this and you had it maybe on the big screen or as a screenplay, you get a little bit more context to this guy, and you get why he's one scary, but also why he's a genius at the same time. Like I feel like that would have been far more effective.
And this
Actually make him three-dimensional.
This early book in the trilogy also kind of sets up how everything's connected as well. It kind of gives you a presentation of Grievous as a character, how his story is intertwined with the state of galactic politics and the nature of the Jedi and the Senate, and why they're kind of at odds with each other, and how that affects the kind of framing of the presentation of the war as a whole. From the Separatist to Republic movement, to the Jedi to the Sith kind of ideology, and all of the little sort of bricks in between. It explains why this conflict is multi-layered and multifaceted, and why we should care. That's the kind of primary hammer focus of at least the first third of this book.
I agree with that.
But
was I going to give my recommended reading list before we got into
whack that in before we jump into chapter 1. Sorry, my bad.
Okay. So this is James Luceno's writing style is typically to reference everything ever when he tells a story, and sort of build upon the bones of other stories to make his own. And so I thought I mainly picked out a few books that I recommend, or they're not all books, but you get what I mean. A few works that I think you should experience for yourself before you read this for the first time if you haven't already. Jango Fett Open Seasons, sort of a comic miniseries that highlights Jango Fett and his mentality and just sort of Mandalorian camaraderie, because that and how that impacted the clones is referenced directly in this book. Along with that, Star Wars Republic, specifically the issues 49 through 77, which detail the Clone Wars up through like the time of the actual events of the Revenge of the Sith movie, like going into that. You should read the whole series anyway because it's great. But he references a lot of things like from there that I think if the reader hasn't experienced those comics, they're not necessarily going to know what he's talking about, like Dirge or Quinlan Voss's infiltration of Count Dooku's inner circle, things like that. The Battle of Jabim also. So yeah, there's that. The microseries, of course, probably should have referenced or made this clear earlier. The microseries is kind of like an alternate version of this same story on some level after a certain point. The book as a whole, like sort of like, what is it, season 3 of the microseries is basically the Battle of Coruscant, or the start of it, right? And a lot of that is different from like what's in this book, but you can sort of retcon it around that most of the stuff peacefully coexists. It's just you have to play with the timeline a little bit and sort of replace the events on Nelvon with like something else.
Yeah, that's the one that doesn't really work, but the stuff that happens on Coruscant, I feel like does actually, you can make work. But the thing is, like, regardless of that sort of clash, a lot of those events are important, like, for this book. I mean, that's the actual debut of Grievous himself. And also things like smaller things, but still important things like Obi-Wan's victory over the banking clan on Munilist. Those are referenced here. It's part of the plot. So it helps you understand and picture the narrative better in your head, I think. Oh, and also the business on Cato Pneumonia doesn't count. That totally is what he's. That's what I assumed he was referencing here.
Yeah, I think so. Because it's like, dude, let's not talk about it.
9th time.
And then also, this is less important, but I also recommend reading Dark Rendezvous, among other things. I mean, it's a great book anyway. It's excellent, but that really gets into the relationship between Yoda and Dooku. That's like a big aspect of that book. And you don't need that to understand the characters as they're represented in this trilogy of novels, because Yoda and Dooku are well explained, like in Labyrinth and Revenge of the Sith, but more familiarity doesn't hurt. So I recommend that. Same thing goes with Shatterpoint. It's like the same for Mace Windu. And then lastly, I also recommend reading Darth Maul Shadowhunter, which is a little less obvious. It's largely unrelated to the actual events of Labyrinth of Evil, but that book provides a really intricate and sort of fascinating look at Coruscant itself. It sort of makes Coruscant a character in that narrative, and it's Coruscant before the war. And Bail Organa, the loyalist senators that we referenced earlier, they talk a lot about how Coruscant has been impacted by the war. I think it's interesting to have that sort of before and after look at it. And that book also kind of functions like what Plagueis was and what this is for Revenge of the Sith. That book, along with the Darth Plagueis novel, are like an interesting lead into the events of Phantom Menace, along with Cloak of Deception, which I don't recommend because it's dull as dog shit, which is also written by Lucino. It's his worst book, by the way. But then there's also the characters of Newt Gunray and Rune Hako, and their sort of strained relationship as like this sort of odd couple that runs the Trade Federation and don't really like each other but have to work together. And just Nymordian culture is explored a lot in that book as well. So yeah, that's it from me. I think you should read all those books or cartoons, whatever, before you get into this book if you really want to get the full gist of it. So that's about it. And we can jump in unless you guys had stuff to add.
Nothing to add from me. That's a good summation of the reading list we should be putting forward for this one.
Yeah.
So chapter 1 to 3 we're kind of doing in one piece because of how they kind of blend together the idea. Unlike most of the chapters throughout this book, which are exceedingly short, by the way. Like one of them is like a single page turn long. These three are kind of truncated together in their what they're kind of presenting because it's the initial battle that kind of helps set up the military conflict in the war.
That way, early on, I think the chapters get longer as the book goes on.
Definitely,
but like early on, they're really minute. Yeah.
But yeah, these three chapters kind of go over the conflict and give you a kind of military establishment and how the war is being fought, and just generally a nice action scene opener for the narrative, effectively, as well as tying together the bond of Anakin and Obi-Wan for anyone who's been living under a rock and doesn't know that exists. I very much enjoyed the presentation of the battle. It was a nice blend of kind of high fantasy action with militaristic kind of lens laid over it, which you don't usually get in Star Wars. It was very kind of practical, and there were a lot of terms that were being thrown around for like the machinery and the tech and the Republic kind of clone protocols and such, that Lucino, because Lucino's always been great, as you said. He always references everything, and that means that his extensive knowledge of how the universe just lives and breathes allows him to enrich pretty much every single scene with odd little tidbit details that most people would just kind of ignore or not even recognize, and other people know, that reference to that factory for that make of weapon is important because we had an entire story back here talking about how that rifle was made and why it was bought by this company and corporation and how it was mass produced. There's so much depth to all of the stuff that's being presented here, and it enriches the experience for me.
I agree with that. I think it's for a particular kind of fan, but I am that kind of fan. I think it would take some people out of the reading experience because they can't picture what it is he's talking about necessarily. But for me, I like it.
When you read the
source
book and know exactly what the gun they're talking about looks like, it's like, yep.
I mean, it is interesting how they took a planet like Cato Nemoidia and made it feel like such a war zone, because just on face value, you would never associate. And for those of you who don't know what planet Cato Nemoidia is, that's the planet that the Starkiller clone goes on to find Rom Koda in The Force Unleashed 2. So there's your visual reference.
Isn't also where Plo Koon got shot down?
Yep.
It is,
that
yes.
too.
So it actually appears in the movies.
But I didn't want to reference that because I didn't want to,
upset
you cry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Flashbacks. But yeah, no, I like the presentation. Also worth noting, because while we do say that he references a lot of stuff, he doesn't just plug it in and just put it in there out of nowhere or bog down the narrative. He does kind of give it through the lens. He's very good at putting the perspective of the characters into the description of what they're seeing. So, for example, if he's talking, this is one of the more mundane examples, but because we mentioned it, if he's talking about a rifle design, he'll be talking about how the Obi-Wan's acknowledging that the clones have an intimate familiarity with it because of this and this. It's not just look, that's the rifle design that I remember is from this factory because of this. Because why would Obi-Wan care about that? It's always presented through a lens of that helps flow with what's being told in the scene.
It's not like every character has like encyclopedia knowledge of Star Wars.
Yeah.
Precisely, or is even going to be considering it. Yeah.
That's a good point, because I remember specifically that when we covered Darth Plagueis, Antoine brought up the point, and I think we all agreed with it, that everyone's voice kind of sounded the same. Like it was just Lucino inserting his voice into like the commentary or whatever. This one, I feel like a more pronounced effort is there to put things in context from like the perspective of the characters involved. Like their voices sound more like them. Their vocabulary, their emotions sound more like them. It feels like he was actually invested in the characters a little bit more for me this time.
Yeah, his strongest voice for sure is Obi-Wan. I feel like Obi-Wan's the one that like screams at me every time there's a line from him. I'm like, oh, that's totally right.
Anakin as well.
He does Mace pretty well. I think he does Mace pretty well too. But that's just me.
Yeah, they're all good in my opinion. I can't think of a bad one. But I think the
and Grievous too. I think Grievous is like what I would
Grievous
want
definitely,
him to be.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely works.
Grievous actually written well.
He not to the same extent, but he's got almost a rolling approach with how he's blending the writing style with the thought process of the characters as well. Like sometimes there'll be a single clipped sentence that wouldn't come from someone like Obi-Wan, but Anakin will be all about that kind of direct thought process. He'll give those
the two pieces. There's a mirror prose that he does. First, it starts with Obi-Wan, or not with Anakin, when he's like, I take Obi-Wan's experience and counsel on occasion, and then he does the same thing with Obi-Wan, where he's like, I follow his instincts, but on occasion.
Yeah, it's a nice kind of setup and parallel between the two, because it does establish here and elsewhere, obviously, that their bond is strong, but still there's that edge of conflict in how they both have very vastly different approaches to things. It's highlighted here how that is both a strength and weakness in the duo early on.
They complement each other, but at the same time, they don't fully trust each other, because there are always certain areas where they know the other guy just isn't gonna just doesn't get it. He can't be told this. I can't expect him to do that, so I need to intervene and take care of that.
I agree with that. And there's times when like both of them kind of have a point. It's not like Anakin's always wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No.
And I also like the way it's portrayed in this particular case. I think it strikes the right balance between, they make fun of each other. No, they don't always agree with each other, but they are very much like, brothers. Like they care about each other. They're not at each other's throat all the time. Yeah.
Like Obi-Wan said that he's like the main contender, like on council for people who are like bad mouthing Anakin or saying things like, nah, you don't understand. And I think that's actually really cool because there's even a sequence where the commandos even like follow Anakin because they're like, wow, like he will put himself in front of us and like will fight first. So that kind of response, like people who know Anakin like actually have had interactions with him. I understand that like at his core he's like a good dude and everything.
Yeah.
But if you see his actions and the consequences of his actions just from the exterior, if you're just like, oh man, you did that crazy stuff on Jabim, or you did what on Yavin 4 kind of a thing, like you don't understand what went into that prior. You just see the results of it. And I think some people on the council like just see Anakin as that and not actually like the interpersonal relationships he has with other Jedi or with the commandos themselves.
And it's sort of like an irony because he's not really, like he kind of has a guard up when he's around them. He's trying to act like something he's not, like a Jedi, basically. And so like they kind of get like that false vibe from him, or like he's not really one of us, like he can't really feel 100% comfortable around them. So like in an ironic sense, the more like they observe him, the more like on edge he is. Like, and when he's really on his own, he's kind of, a little bit more normal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like that oh my God, something about the Guardian related. Someone go, because I forgot my thought entirely. I'm sorry. I remember in a second.
For me, what I found so interesting rereading the Anakin chapters is he is a good person. He does have the true sort of dedication and drive to be a Jedi. But the problem is that he hasn't given that dedication to the higher authority of the Force. He's given that dedication to the secular authority of Chancellor Palpatine. He's a Knight of the Republic first, Jedi second.
Yeah, he strives to be the kind of heroic knight and appeals to the kind of warrior side and soldier side, especially during the war of the Jedi approach to galactic matters. But when it comes to actual Jedidom and the kind of philosophies and mentalities they espouse, he most of the time is actively disagreeing with their nature, to the point where I've never really considered him a Jedi. Like he calls himself a Jedi and people perceive him as a Jedi, but to an extent, to me, he never has really been one. At his core, he sees himself, or would like to see himself, as a hero, and that by itself goes against the Jedi way.
And the reason for that is because, as I think Obi-Wan says, being a Jedi isn't mastering the Force, it's mastering oneself. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that anybody could just be a Force, sensitive in the galaxy and just like, mess around with their talents. But it's not about that. It's really about understanding internally, like, who you are as a person and how you use that ability, not just about the abilities themselves that I think he kind of overlooks sometimes.
Yeah, this subject matter is covered in the opening salvo of the Chapter 5 pages, which I absolutely adore, because it goes through the separate subjects of diving into Jedi kind of philosophy as a whole, through the lens of Obi-Wan, of course. Talking about Anakin's relationship to the Force and other Jedi around him, Qui-Gon Jinn, and how his kind of what he would think of the current situation and the relationships between Anakin and the Force. All of this kind of stuff is covered in a few short pages, and it flows nicely. I mean, even I think Dooku's mentality is brought up at some point,
because he's comparing his relationship to Anakin to what he imagines Dooku's and Qui-Gon's was. So he's trying to draw the parallel, which is interesting because it's like, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Obi-Wan never really interacted with Dooku all that heavily when he was a Padawan, did he? Not that I can remember.
Not that I'm aware, no.
I actually think that what happened is that Obi and Anakin never actually met in person until Attack of the Clones, because Qui-Gon had...
Well, Anakin didn't, because he had already left. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Kenobi.
I believe that actually was the case with Kenobi. I think it's because Qui-Gon and Dooku just had so little to do with each other by the time Obi-Wan was taken on by Qui-Gon that Obi-Wan literally never met him, because Qui-Gon just... At that point, they weren't interacting anymore, because it's talked about that Qui-Gon and Dooku never really connected. It's like they had a good academic relationship. They learned a great deal from each other and benefited from each other, but they never developed that whole father-son relationship that you get between master and apprentice. They were very strictly, you're my teacher, I'm listening.
I think I'm a little more inclined to think they sort of grew apart, like they were closer earlier, and Qui-Gon evolved into like sort of like this, what's the word? Like sort of loose cannon, like from Dooku's perspective. Yeah, like he just couldn't relate to him after a while, so like drifted down separate paths. But I think there is a closeness there. Like literally, in a way, Dooku considers Obi-Wan sort of by proxy like his grandson. Like he sort of sees like that kind of familial bond that like the master Padawan relationship.
Yeah, and that even extends into Revenge of the Sith, where he actually tries to persuade Sidious, like, hey, can we like keep him alive or like try to convince him? Like, can I not? Like, I don't care about Anakin. Can we just like kill Anakin? Actually, if anything, like I would rather have Kenobi.
You get a definite sense of respect in Dooku's eyes for the kind of legacy of Master Padawan, and the kind of the line that creates. He definitely seems to appreciate that in the way the Order works.
Yeah,
and not to get too into this, but like Qui-Gon's death at the hands of a Sith is like a big triggering thing for Dooku. He's like, what? Like I can't handle this, or that sort of sends him off the deep end in some ways that he was already walking toward. Yeah, but still, it's another notch.
Straw that broke the camp. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that this is being presented. All of this is being presented through the kind of perspective of Obi-Wan, because he is the quintessential Jedi, and yet when it comes to his acknowledging or recognizing of the different traits in Anakin, it's always been one of his weak spots, and he's seeing, Anakin will eventually, when he realizes this, he will be unstoppable, and it's like you shouldn't have as much faith in the fact that this is going to happen.
And I think actually, that too, but I think he's also he very much loves him. Anakin, I also feel is self-aware of it too, because in the prose he makes mention that if this was in a time of peace, he might have been able to. Not because there's a sequence where he talks about using his rage, and he says that in time of peace he would have been able to deal with all this stuff, but because he's been in the Clone Wars for 3 years, he's found that this has been a useful tool. The only thing I didn't like about this piece of prose is that I think it does kind of take away from the epiphany he has within the Revenge of the Sith opening chapters when he's facing Dooku, because that's a big sequence of him having that turning point where Palpatine's letting him know hey, you should use your dark side, and that's what's holding him back from actually pushing him over to defeat Dooku. That's a really cool moment to me, and having him already being so open to using the rage in a very proactive way here, I felt isn't in line thematically with the next book that comes after this.
In a way, I actually feel that, ironically enough, the novelization of the Clone Wars movie by Karen Travis, it's legitimately good book, and it's I found that the Anakin sequences in that book were really good because she presented Anakin as a guy who was flirting with the dark side but was in denial about it.
Right.
Which is definitely how this is presented here. Yeah, I agree with both of you. The presentation of Anakin here is that he's comfortable and familiar with his use of passion and anger in combat. He just accepts it as something you have to do if you want to reach your highest potential, or at least get near it. But it's not till and which does in a way diminish the thematic impact of the kind of realization during the film or Revenge of the Sith in general. Antoine, I
don't think about the film. I think about the
novelization. Sorry, that's what I specified.
We all,
but most
as
people
far as I'm
familiar
concerned,
with the film.
This is episode 3. This entire volume is episode 3.
Absolutely, I completely agree. But
that would be dope, man. That would be so dope.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
Episode 3 is a 3-hour epic.
Yeah, but I agree that it does kind of take away thematically from that, or at least a little bit of the impact for it. But at the same time, on a narrative
should have been
level,
rephrased.
Yeah, it should have been rephrased in how his thought process is happening. Yeah. But it makes sense for it happening here, though. That's all. It just does take away from the thematic side.
Yeah. One thing I will say that does kind of make sense, though, is that he's talking about drawing on his anger. He makes no mention about the light or dark sides of the Force because, well, it's the problem is that because Anakin's mentality has been so heavily influenced by Palpatine, he views the Force as a tool. He really doesn't care about aspects. It's he's okay, the dark side's bad. Why?
And at the same time, he is kind of it makes specific mention of the fact that he, is always in the Force or of the Force. He specifically says how other people draw on it and use it, and he never has to do that. He just intuitively does it. So there's kind of that contrast.
I think he was saying that that's actually like a Jedi teaching, is that there's no real use of the Force, is that you're always in the Force. I think that was his own mentality.
Well, no, he specifically says other Jedi use, and draw on, but he never has to.
I thought it was like he said that the Jedi.
I'm pretty sure that's the phrasing for it.
I think Kellen's right, actually.
Yeah, but where's the tone of surprise?
Oh, but I mean,
no, I'm kidding.
I'm usually disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
But yeah, no. I like as well the fact that this came immediately after Chapter 5, because this is Chapter 6. When we delve into Anakin's psyche as a whole, I like that runs parallel to Obi-Wan's own thoughts. So you get kind of his experience, and then immediately follow on with Anakin's, and that they're both those diving into their psyches are kind of attached to the plot narrative of them having been separated personally. So there's a reason they're so introspective and personally focused on what they happen to be doing at the moment. They're not just excluding the other while they're fighting alongside them. The mentalities of the characters are joined when they're together, and then they separate into their little side paths and where they do differ whenever they're apart. And I like the kind of theme of that.
And this is the point where he makes the decision, then rather to continue pursuing, he goes back to help Obi-Wan.
It is, yes.
I really like that. Yeah, because he's still he's still hero, at that point, and not rabid dog or crazy off the deep end. He's even angry about Gunray because of the threat he posed to his wife, but he still makes the more mature decision to go back and help Obi-Wan, which I like.
Right.
Exactly. He's and not only that he kind of has this internal struggle for a moment. He recognizes that he's going to have to make the sacrifice. He calls the Starfighter to him. He has that moment of oh God, all right, let's go rescue Obi-Wan. It's not like this this great tug of war. It's just kind of acknowledgement of, okay, I'm gonna have to do this, which is where that kind of focus on him not having fallen yet. He's still on the knife's edge. He's still an accident waiting to happen. That's just a natural response to his personal approach to combat, if nothing else. But he's still very much in Anakin good mode here.
To me, moments like that show that he wasn't doomed from the start. That if circumstances had been different, he could have been a good guy.
Absolutely,
he could have been what he was supposed to be.
Yeah, but at the same time, it does also highlight that dangerous edge. It's not a single point half and half where we're seeing Anakin as this unstable raging lunatic that could turn at any moment, but it still acknowledges both sides of the coin and how fate could have spun either way.
And that's the aspect that makes me buy it at the end of the day as a tragedy. If this guy was doomed from the beginning, then whatever, who cares? But the fact that there was a chance makes it sad.
Makes it, it is just the definition of a tragedy that presented that way. But
he is separate. He did separate himself from the Jedi, from himself, that he says the Jedi do use the Force, and that he's fully in it all the time.
Yeah, which is ironic because it's not actually the case. It's usually the other way around. He is, as you said, he is kind of drawing on it, and they're the ones who are living in it. But it's just it's again highlighting that kind of.
It could also just be his ease of use too. It comes in more naturally.
That as well.
That's what I thought it was. That's how I
think it's also the difference in how they interact with it. Jedi are trained to treat themselves as extensions of the Force. They're swimming in it, whereas Anakin he's 2 steps away from being a dark sider. He's trying to consolidate that power within himself and channel it instead. So for him,
it's like a booty call, man.
And this entire chapter is kind of establishing how oblivious he is to the dangers of his own mentality here. He's very comfortable with his thought process, and it's I'm willing to acknowledge Obi-Wan on occasion, but I'm still right here, and they don't understand this, and I have to therefore prove it with my ways. That's where he's coming from. He just can't see how close he is to that knife's edge. Mm-hmm. Which is almost what makes him, is what keeping him back from that at the same time. It's a double-edged sword. That's what makes him still the hero, because he's not capable of seeing it yet. He's not fallen that far, but it's the same thing that's pushing him to it.
I don't think it's a philosophical difference that he's stubbornly clinging to. It's a lack of foresight on his part, because he's so cavalier about everything, And at the same time, it does allow him to accomplish a lot of good. I mean, we'll get to it in a bit, but the fact that he stopped the Mechno chair from being destroyed, that was all him, and it was an impulsive thing to do, but it turned out to be the right thing to do. And he sort of, I think, piles more justifications up in his mind to justify I'm right to do the things that I do, even though sometimes it gets him way in over his head and off the deep end,
talking about in over your head and off the deep end, Chapter 7. Jumping to Obi-Wan, completely high on spores.
Well, first off, before the plot-wise, the reason why they're on Cato Nemodia is because they're trying to apprehend Newt Gunray, who's trying to like gather together his possessions. Even though they're supposed to be retreating to the Outer Rim. And so they're making this military push underneath these the native beetles there, because that was a way so the drones or whatever, the surveillance couldn't see them.
Basically, the basement of Newt Gunray's fortress was an insect hive for giant beetles the size of a large car, who walk around harvesting leaves from the orchards around his fortress, and then using the leaves as a growth medium to grow this fungus that Neimoidians sell because its spores make people high.
Yeah, we do actually learn a lot about Neimoidian culture and, their growth rate, interestingly enough.
It's really funny how... So sorry, Evan. Go ahead.
It's fine. No, it's fine.
It's just funny how, to a non-nerd, what Connor just said sounds like absolute stupidity. But it's interesting on a political level. He's absolutely right. That's exactly what happens. But it's just really interesting on the political and economic level. That's the reason.
The Neimoidians made their money selling purple kush.
Yeah, it's pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now,
that's what spices are.
Exactly. Before we get into that segment, though, just this one little thing I like to point out. I like how Chapter 2 notes that Obi-Wan Kenobi has a particular way of viewing the clone troopers compared to other Jedi due to his experiences with Jango Fett. I just think that's an interesting little tidbit because it makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
it's
the little bit of... Oh, sorry, Connor.
It's one thing I like is it's another little point of commonality, but that Obi has with Mace Windu, in that they both have they both have a different attitude towards the clones because they have personal experience with Jango Fett, and it's like they were. It's interesting that both Kenobi and Windu, in regards to Jango Fett, it's like they were simultaneously impressed by him and repulsed, because that's kind of what Mandalorians are. It's like they represent the height of that sort of self-actualization as an individual that Jedi strive for, but they achieve it by being a pack of murderers.
And I like the initial reaction that Obi-Wan has, a kind of flash of, oh, okay, calm down, it's not him. And when the clone takes his helmet off, he still has that. It's not PTSD, but it's a lesser kind of reactionary response to it.
Because
it's invoking his image. That they're going to leave that impact for him.
Yeah, because it's like the last time these two saw each other, it's in the flesh. It's like they were beating the shit out of each other, basically.
And then Order 66 happened. I bet that probably kicked in some memories too.
Yeah. Way to hammer in that.
I knew this would happen.
Yeah, but this is a good example actually of a more interesting example of way the Lucino blends kind of references and world building into the emotional lens of the characters. Because before we mentioned how it was the rifle, but here is a better one. How that immediate reactionary response to the clone's face is like, okay, Jango Fett, sort of momentary flashback. Then we get his kind of comments on his personal experiences with Alpha and other clones referenced in other stories, and then how his experience with that kind of affect his personal relationships with the clones present here, and then immediately following that we get his actual response to this situation involving these characters and Cody and everything. He always layers it into what's happening on screen, as it were, on page. It's not just let me reference this thing I know because I'm a clever lore person, and that's why I appreciate it.
In that same sequence, he also notes how only half of the original 1.2 million clones are in fighting shape, which which I'm a little iffy on, but we'll just roll with that.
It goes back to the whole problem with Star Wars scale again, because they never get it right.
A lot more than that.
It's not even remotely close to being accurate.
It's like you're not fighting on Earth, you're fighting in a galaxy.
Ironically enough, Warhammer 40k put more thought into that aspect of their setting.
Yeah, and 40k just throws scale out the window by intention. But yeah, anyway, getting back to where we were in the story, if anyone else doesn't have any other points to make, back to chapter 7.
Back to chapter 7.
I mean, chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the first time in this book where Anakin is referred to as the hero with no fear. Is that the first time that ever happened? Because I know the Revenge of the Sith encyclopedia refers to him as that too, but I can't remember which came out first.
It's a good point. I'd forgotten about that one. I'm not sure,
because I know Lucino and Matthew Stover spoke to each other briefly before their books came out, so it's very possible that either of them I don't know who, maybe probably Matthew Stover because it was such a huge thing for him. Maybe have given each other notes about that so that it'd be mentioned here. So I don't think it was mentioned before. I don't mention it was beforehand. Yeah, I don't think it was ever.
Yeah, and I can't remember either. So this was probably the first time that title was ever.
Used, yeah. And it's good because it helps kind of bring in the ideas we were discussing before about where Anakin is at this point in his head and other people's perception of him. The differentiation between the clone perspective and the Jedi perspective. It's good to see, examples of his heroism on the field.
Mm-hmm. I also like Anakin's other title that goes with the hero with no fear, the Warrior of the Infinite.
Yeah, I'm less impressed by that one. I think that's a bit, I don't know, odd compared to the
that's actually the reason why I like it. It really just sticks out. It's like, who would come up with that?
That's why I don't like it, because who would come up with
weird,
that? And who would
but it's
kind
of interesting.
Yeah.
Also, TC-16 is introduced in Chapter 4.
Very true. Very true.
Yes.
That comes up.
They bring back the protocol droid from the start of the Phantom Menace, who greeted Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon when they entered the Trade Federation ship. And they bring
them with some gayos.
Actually, a different one. That one was feminine.
I think Phantom Menace. I think that was 14, not 16.
Yeah, 14. Which who knows what happened to 15? 15 must have been exploded in the middle of the war. But whatever. Yeah.
Well,
there's another story. There's another story Lucino could write. The Tale of TC-15.
That's a comic somewhere.
Tragedy. The tragedy.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the tragedy of TC-15?
TC-15.
But yeah, anything else want to come before we jump back to 7?
In the comments to write a story about that.
Chapter 7. We've not yet talked about what happened.
Yeah,
that's what he's trying to get to. But three of us in our notes mentioned Kenobi being a drunk, being a pirate.
This is drunken style.
Drunken Master Sarisu for the win.
It's interesting.
But surprisingly, he manages to be very effective.
Yeah.
It's very similar if you think, we actually are going to get this in Revenge of the Sith novelization too, but his fight with Grievous, or I think right before his fight with Grievous when he's fighting all the droids, where he has this oneness with the Force feeling, where he's literally letting the will of the Force take him completely. And it's similar here because I'm kind of out of it right now. I should probably just let it do its thing, Maybe that's the key for all Jedi. Just get drunk.
That's the thing. That's what I was about to make. It's interesting here because Obi-Wan is definitely enhanced by this experience in terms of his oneness. But this could very easily kill another Jedi if because of Obi-Wan's general approach to how he wields the Force and how he fights in combat. His separation from or height and state of mind in the abstract sense allows him to achieve that oneness much easier. Whereas for another Jedi, someone who's more focused on thinking and more of a cerebral combatant, that would be their undoing. Yeah, Dooku, for example. I mean, they'd fight off the poison, but if they couldn't and they were forced into this kind of state of mind, that would be a weakness for sure. It's nice that it's not for Obi-Wan.
It'd be disastrous.
Yeah, and it's not like he. Yeah, it's not like Kenobi just fights through a couple of enemies while in this state. No, the novel specifically notes that he was fighting 50 droids by himself.
Yeah, which Anakin says they're caught by droids, but specifically.
Yeah, and he was like, "What?"
So why is that relevant? Yeah, but the clones have specifically called this in is that they've identified this as okay. This is too much for Obi-Wan. We have experience with this. We need help. And yet, even then, because of this heightened state, he dealt with them himself. So it does specifically point out that he was going beyond what he usually does.
Sort of.
The thing I also like.
Antoine first.
Because Anakin was initially gonna go after Gunray. He doesn't just get mad at Kenobi and be like, "Oh, you had it yourself. I was gonna go after him. Revenge." He just kind of makes a joke of it.
Yeah, he doesn't get angry about that. He is just kind of enjoying the moment because who wouldn't? You're seeing completely off his head Obi-Wan, which for Anakin is going to be deeply satisfying.
Yeah. What lightsaber?
By the way, I think Lestrade filmed you on his phone.
Oh, this is actually I confused this part in another one of our podcasts where I was trying to remember which beings they called out as being distinct threats to Grievous that Dooku named, and I thought he mentioned Shakti, but he didn't. Anakin mentioned Shakti and Kit here as other esteemed swordsmen that like Obi-Wan would have been embarrassed in front of if they could see this, you know?
Yeah, which is funny because Kit Fisto is probably one of the other examples of someone who would benefit, I think, whereas Shaak Ti definitely
dear
isn't.
Lord.
For getting drunk out of his
A high
mind.
Kit Fisto.
You know,
That
one
grin.
thing I do love about this sequence is that it sets a very interesting counterpoint to the presentation of Darth Bane in Rule of Two, where he's got the Orbalisk armor that's basically hopping him up on adrenaline and anger hormones to drive him mad, and how this allows him to channel the dark side more fully. It's interesting because this is basically direct confirmation that drugs can and do, by altering your mental state, they do alter your relationship with the Force and can, in fact, make you more powerful. Or, alternatively, you got death sticks, which, as we see in Legacy, can burn out your connection to the Force and cut you off from it. Which, you know, it's interesting to think about what sort of effect would different drugs have on powerful Force sensitives. It's like, you got these spores, which basically just mellows you right the fuck out and puts you in a state of total oneness with the light side. And then you got the Orbalisks, which exact opposite. It's like adrenaline.
There is a chemical
Downer
component.
versus an upper.
Yeah, there is a chemical component when it comes to, you know, the way the brain operates, and that's definitely going to have a cerebral effect on your connection to the Force. It's for sure. It's nice to have it kind of explored in some of the material.
Yeah,
but that's effectively chapter 7 because that's literally it's just one page turn and you're on chapter 8, which highlights gun
Chapter 8
rays.
is where we.
Sorry,
this is where he comes. Sorry, I was just gonna say this is the chapter where he comes into the novel in full, and is lamenting that he wasn't able to get all of his stuff, and and he's also being exiled from his planet.
Yes, yeah.
I love how the novel mentions that like secondary.
Yeah.
Like I love how the first thing he complains about is his stuff, and I'm like, oh boy.
And then it goes on to specifically kind of highlight them as being called purse worlds. You know, it's because that's their source of income.
Yeah.
It's why it's such a big deal politically speaking, and why they're leaving it is more important on a galactic level. But
it's not just him. It notes that like all the separatist leaders have been driven from their homes.
Yes, yeah.
It's one of the interesting things about the Clone Wars itself, because Palpatine basically he co-opted the populist revolution within the Star Wars setting that was basically rising up against the Republic's, decadence, basically. And he basically just used the Separatists to gather up all of those problem individuals that needed to be eliminated for the Sith to achieve power as emperors. Because if these guys were still around when he declared the Empire, it's like, they're not going to back him. He needs the support of all the major corporations to maintain power, and these are the people who would very specifically not back an emperor. So
yeah, because as is mentioned in this chapter, they rely so heavily on the Republic corruption to gain profit. They don't want this super organized, less bureaucratic kind of infrastructure. They benefit from the bureaucratic nightmare that is where the Senate operates. And I like that that's brought up in this particular chapter, because it's discussing the Neimoidian connection to the Separatists, and how originally, in fact even now perhaps, they weren't on board with the Separatist idea because of that reliance on corruption to gain their profit margins. They were co-opted and brought into it by force by the way the city has played them, and yet acknowledging that, they still have to stick with him because it says he has a sense that there's still a larger plan at work, and he's still useful in play, but he still recognizes that he's completely screwed other than that. He's dependent on these lords and masters that he doesn't want to have any dependence over. It's a dive into not only the Neimoidian or at least Gunray's mentality, but also the kind of reasons the people are leaning towards separatists by their own intention or otherwise.
I think it's also important to establish why he's still working with this guy after he got screwed as early in the game as the Phantom Menace. It's why are you still doing this?
Yeah.
And it explains that he's kind of in too deep to get out, pretty much.
Yeah.
One of the other things I do like about this chapter is that it also shows the relationship between Newt Gunray and Rune Hako. And the thing I like is that when you read their relationship in Darth Maul Shadowhunter, they're rivals. They don't like each other, and there are, a lot of veiled statements and half threats and stuff. It's like
not so veiled Newt refers to Hako in his mind as an insufferable prig. So yeah, they really don't like each other.
But the funny thing is that when you fast forward 13 years to this scene where they're standing next to each other, they're offloading all of Newt Gunray's shit from the palace, and it's the whole impression of, yeah, at this point they're married. Yeah. It's like they've learned. It's really weird because you get the impression that at this point they're truly an odd couple pairing, and yeah.
Let me tell you about my best friend.
God, he's Nemoidian style.
Yeah.
There's also an interesting idea brought up in this particular chapter that I want to bring up for discussion, and that is the idea of the separatist movement as a whole. The idea that it was initially supposed to be, or is presented by Dooku as, an alternative to the Republic on a galactic stage. It was supposed to be an option for planets to secede from the Republic and join this separate government that would operate in a different way, perhaps more towards their personal benefit or ideology. Now, would you be in favour of a separatist movement if it hadn't been controlled by the Sith and actually was, led by the likes of well, I don't know, the equivalent of Amidala, for example, on their side? Because
most definitely, the Republic itself was just too old. That's basically what it came down to. There were too many legislation. But it's just down to the fact that the Republic itself was it was in a state of total deadlock to the point where basic decision-making was almost impossible. The only time they got off their keisters and did anything was when a situation erupted into a full-on brushfire war, like the Yinchori crisis, like the Naboo crisis. Those were pretty much the only instances where the Senate did anything at all. The rest of the time, it was just like one senator pushes something, another senator counters, nothing happens.
What's really your question, though, Colin? Like these guys specifically, or
just a separatist movement in general? Yeah. Because I like the way it kind of framed the question of an alternative to the Republic, rather than a decisive separation. Because unfortunately, the way the separatists went about their business and the planets that they brought out of the Republic system, it meant that they took control of certain trade lanes, took control of planetary income and export. Export and import both, and that meant that the Republic was threatened because eventually they would be strangleheld by the idea of the separatists, and that would lead to war. That was the kind of the idea that was presented in the chapter. Do you think that was inevitable from any separatist movement, or just the way this was framed?
I think it was just inevitable in the sense that at this point the galaxy had gone about 1,000 years without a major war. Something would have happened to cause a major war. A separatist crisis was just the most likely thing. But it could have been anything.
Yeah, okay. I mean, the Jedi kind of say as much, that something was going to happen, but because the Sith is controlling both sides, it got to this horrific level where it wouldn't have necessarily before. The whole idea from like a perspective, like a potential like alternate reality might have been for like the droid armies to just being built up sort of kind of indefinitely until, surprise, we have like 10 trillion, million, gabillion droids, and we're pulling all of our resources, and we have an unstoppable army. Bow down to our demands, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, almost by chance, it's brought up in the novel about the clone army. But this is why I brought it up, because there's a criticism of the prequel films in general about the whole separatist movement and why the Republic has a problem with it. And I like that this specific chapter in this specific book brings up the reason why. Or at least the book in general, does. It is, like you said, the fact that if they had gone unchecked, they would have basically just been the dominant power in the galaxy because they would have had a droid army that outweighed anything the Republic could muster.
The reason I was confused by your initial question is because there's no circumstance I can imagine where these specific heads of these various guilds and corporations would have been just leaders. Like this group is always going to be corrupt no matter what.
Absolutely.
But the idea of a hypothetical separatist or what do you call it, like replacement government is not necessarily bad to me. If that's what you were asking.
It would just have to be a case of doing it in such a way that doesn't cause conflict, which is just, to me, I think probably inevitable, the nature of the opposition. The alternative would be provided, and then there would be conflict of interest between, and on a galactic stage, that's almost certainly going to spark war. which is why I support the Jedi involvement, basically, because I understand that they are there to stop that kind of the Republic from being basically held hostage by the Separatists' armies. It's just an interesting discussion.
The Jedi are between a rock and a hard place here. Like they had to be involved, even though it doomed them. Yeah.
It was basically the Mandalorian Wars all over again, because, well, the Clone Wars is what happens when the Jedi do get involved. The Mandalorian Wars is what happens when they don't. Either way, they're fucked.
It's called checkmate.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's why Sidious did it. But yeah, it's just an interesting idea presented over the rules.
Well, actually, on that topic of Sidious doing, clever checkmates where it's basically a win-win for him no matter how it goes, the Separatists themselves also represent a kind of contingency. If he can't get total control of the Republic and actually reform it into the Empire, he still has the option of just openly taking control of the Separatists as Darth Sidious and conquering the galaxy with the droid armies.
It's like, what's crazy is there's actually, if you play the Galactic Conquest on the original Battlefront 2, there's as the CIS and you win, that's the cutscene at the end is actually that.
It's Sidious just taking control because...
How's that for an obscure reference, guys?
Yep. Excellent. But yeah, that's how you create a win-win. It doesn't matter because he controls every faction and every single faction that opposes him is in a position to be completely destroyed. It's like it doesn't matter who wins, Palpatine wins.
When you put it that way, he kind of puts the troll in the word control because like he screws over these early leaders. They go running to like Dooku, and Dooku's like, yeah, come with me. And then like a few years into it, goes, my master's that guy that screwed you over. Surprise! I'm also a Sith. It
even says in the chapter that's how it happened. That he said, oh, by the way, I'm also a Sith.
Yeah. So I mean, Palpatine can't be beat.
Back out.
I can only wonder how many Separatists shit their pants when they found out who they were actually working for.
Now there are two of them. But yeah, but that leads us to...
Anyway, getting back to the chapter...
Yeah, that leads us to chapter 9.
Newt Gunray realizes...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Closing up?
Well, no, in 8, he realizes his Mechno chair is missing.
Well, he says it actually in prose. It's out of fear, certainly. So it totally... Yeah. The mention of Sidious is fear-inducing.
Yeah,
but yeah.
But what's interesting is Chapter 8 also notes how does make note that like out of all the leadership, the one that scares them the most is Grievous, not Dooku and Sidious.
Yes, excellent point. This is the introduction of Grievous to the book, and it's kind of like, oh god, not them. I don't care about them. Think about Grievous, because he's the more tangible, present threat to their lives. That is, this towering creature of fear. And having just watched the micro series, anyone reading this is going to understand that, which I like that it led with that him on reputation rather than the initial introduction to the scene physically in the book.
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. He finds out. He realizes that he's left the chair behind, and then it's oh crap, because that's his connection to Sidious via the Star Wars equivalent of the interwebs, or the Separatist equivalent of the interwebs.
And the thing I like about this is that they determine that they play the blame game because that's what Nimordians do. Like they can't be. I don't want to be liable for this, But then when they finally realize that there's nothing they can do about that, this is the problem at hand. They go, well, what can we do? Can we whatever, like we wipe the information? Like, no, but we can maybe make it, destroy itself. And every time when I was a kid and I did something wrong and I tried to cover it up, I only made whatever I did way more noticeable. Like whatever I did. And like that's what they did. Like by trying to force the thing to to destroy itself, it calls the Jedi's attention to it much more so than they had initially,
Whereas if they had done nothing, it's just like Obi-Wan would have realized, oh shit, same chair. Neat.
Yeah.
Cool. And they might have.
Well, he does in the next chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might have looked more deeply into it, but it would have taken a lot more longer, and probably would have been more paperwork and stuff like that.
They would have backbenched it, so it wouldn't have been this priority for them, and it wouldn't have led them immediately to this next lead. And Anakin certainly wouldn't have taken.
I think that's their priority one when it's like self-destruct. What?
Yeah.
What? Okay.
And I just love the image of that. And one of the favorite things about this book is that Sidious was almost undone by the idiocy of this kind of situation. Oh, I left a chair behind, and that nearly undid the grand plan. I love the fragility of the idea of the fragility of that lens to the Sith kind of master plan.
Yeah, and I love it because he needed their resources, but they're idiots, So it's like his hands are. He has to roll the dice on this, and it almost screwed up on him. Like he almost didn't make it. Yeah,
I think that's a much more compelling conflict and piece of tension if it was in the movie, or that storyline was in it, not what we get.
Yeah.
The fact that Sidious was only one email to the wrong person away from being ousted. It's like, oh shit, I sent that email intended for such and such to the senator from the Republic. Fuck.
I mean, and history and real life is rife with examples like that. I mean, look at the First World War and the insanity of the trigger.
Oh my god, that was crazy.
The circumstances around that are mind-boggling. But the idea that someone in 50 years' time in the Star Wars universe would look back, had it gone the way of the Jedi, and this had been the Sith's undoing, that being the historical footnote would have been absolutely hilarious. The Nemoidian, corrupt Nemoidian that the Sith had manipulated eventually led to his undoing by forgetting his chair. Yeah, but anyway, that closes that chapter and leads us into chapter 9, where we find Anakin and Obi-Wan discussing
the chair.
Yeah, the chair, effectively.
Which Obi-Wan recognizes from Naboo.
Yeah, which I found a bit odd.
The chair actually appears in Phantom Menace, which is crazy.
Yeah, but to me, I found it really odd that he thought, oh, I recognise this chair. It's like, this is the chair I saw 10 years ago, this one random person was sat in.
I agree with you, Callan. It would have been better just for them to catch it trying to destroy itself and then go, they're clearly hiding something. But yeah, the idea he was actually musing about it just for no reason, I agree with you.
It was a bit convenient. It was a bit. There are two examples of it in the 1 to 18, and I'll get the next one later, where it happens like this.
Well, to be fair, it's because it's supposed to have a very different design to most other things. So, and that's the reason why they go forward and look for the designer of it, because it's most holo things, or holo projectors, are not like that. They don't look like that. They don't walk themselves and stuff like that. So he does have a musing that kind of gives you. I mean, whether or not you buy it or not, he does give a reason for it.
Yeah, no, it is definitely explained in the book. It's just, to me, it was that's a bit
It's not
contrived.
the most natural thing.
Yeah,
it's not
right,
the most
exactly.
Thing.
I almost would have preferred if they'd just been sat looking out a window, or stood looking out the window together, and then in the background the thing just kind of crawled into space on the screen, and just immediately started going off.
It made a little bit more sense if Obi realized that he saw the chair before after the whole thing, when he's like, "Hey, I saw this chair before."
Yeah, so as that happens, that's when it stirs the memory, something like that.
Or if something had called his attention to it, he's just kind of wondering about it. If TC-16 had been like, "Oh no, the Master's chair, they'll be furious with me for leaving it," he'd go, "What? This chair? I think I recognize it." That would something calling his attention to it would have been better, I feel.
Yeah, rather than, "I was just thinking about how I noticed this chair." It seems a bit odd.
Yeah.
But yeah, as we said before, Anakin's quick thinking and instinctive kind of jump to try and stop the explosion was good. I liked as well that this is actually a good example of it. Very, very focused and small one, but it's poignant. How Anakin's kind of jumping to action is both the right decision, but also needed Obi-Wan to pull him back, because if he hadn't, he'd been, completely screwed over by the poison.
Yes.
It was both mentalities working together again, specifically pointing out the idea that was raised beforehand in the earlier chapters, that both of them complement each other, both of them are right, and both of them have to work in tandem if they want results. Obi-Wan specifically says, sometimes I have to jump in and pull Anakin back from the fire, but at the same time, Anakin gets the results.
How many times have we won because he did the right thing? Yeah,
this being the perfect example. They have to. Both mentalities have to come together for them to operate at their fullest potential. But both are also separately right. I like that. Even if it's just talking about the stupid explosive chair, it's a nice point.
Is this the point where he makes fun of Anakin for being overzealous about taking stuff apart and jokes about leaving him back in waters that a little mean? That I know it was a joke, but that's a little, I don't know, that one didn't feel quite like Obi-Wan to me. That felt like not something he would say.
I agree. Yeah, it wasn't said with any malice, but it was an odd joke to make. And in fact, that was actually something I wanted to raise. The humor and joke, kind of jest and banter in this book, at least early on, is a bit off when it comes to Obi-Wan and Anakin. Sometimes it just comes out of nowhere, and they'll have an entire string of sentences where I'm like, why are you saying that here, and what, this is out of place banter. This felt like that to me.
This is the only one I remember being weird. I mean, I'll take your word for it. Maybe there are other ones, but this one felt a little out of character for me with Obi-Wan.
Yeah, it's like Obi-Wan. Well, the thing is that it's a joke that's in very bad taste, and Obi doesn't do bad taste jokes.
Yeah, it's true. And you can see Anakin's he mentions it later on in his musings that was a painful jab, even if it wasn't intended as such. But is there anything else about this chapter that we want to bring up before we jump on to Bail? Anything else?
Not in particular for me.
Okay, so chapter 10 brings us to Bail Organa and his introspective thoughts on the state of Coruscant, the war, and Palpatine specifically.
Yes.
The Bush administration.
Yeah, yeah. I like the
dear.
This first mention of, well, before we get to that, he's thinking about the state of the Coruscant and how everyone's kind of separated from the war, but at the same time so affected, the subtle changes that have been going on. I like the description for it. As well, the most interesting thing to me is the background framing of the anti-Jedi propaganda that no one recognizes as such. How they're not quite covered. That they're and when they mention anything in the Senate meetings, it's always the aggressive peacekeeping. There's that subtle undertone that's leading into the groundwork of that's cities to try to put into the back of everyone's mind.
Or not so subtle, unsubtle.
Well, yeah, but to someone who doesn't know there's a grand plan, to us it's very unsubtle.
I agree with you. I agree.
But yeah,
I was joking.
Yeah,
but
it's very true though. It's funny how it stands out to us as like a red light, but to everyone else it's just completely normal. He is laying in fact the groundwork for that idea though.
I mean, this is sort of one of the common complaints about the book, at least at the time when it came out, even in like professional editorial reviews, and of the prequels in general, was that like too many obvious parallels between the Bush administration and like George Lucas's story. Like he just sort of lifted all that and plugged it in. Like he even has like a triad of evil, I think he refers to as in here, and that was like a famous like clipping or a quote from Bush, about like terrorist powers and things like that.
And also making the aliens kind of like the minorities, whether it's like the Japanese of World War II or like the Muslims of 9/11 and Afghanistan, Iraq War, and all that stuff.
That made no sense to me in the context it was provided. It said non-humans need not apply. How the hell did that get greenlit in the current state? When the Empire comes about, I completely get it. But in that instant, how the hell did that happen?
I get the idea. I mean, they even say in the Revenge of the Sith novel that it's not an accident that the leadership of the Separatists are all non-humans. It's like to scapegoat these people as bad. But yeah, you're right. Like because the Republic is still up and running here, like what are we doing? Who greenlit this? Is a good question.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, because I completely buy it.
That kind of goes with like Bale's worries.
Yeah, but you're right, Evan. Sorry, that leads into Bale's thoughts. Yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say it leads into his worries because he does fear the extra militarization. Yes, he does fear all the breaches of privacy and all that. But he even specifically notes that his biggest fear, the thing that unsettles him the most out of all this, is the ease with which the majority of the populace just kind of goes along with the new status quo.
Yeah, and I actually do buy.
That is very concerning.
Yeah, yes, but that's the thing. There's two things. I completely buy that side. The fact that they do just hand over power and let it be someone else's problem. These guys seem to know what they're doing, so let's give that. I buy that completely, and I like how that's framed in this chapter. But the idea that anyone was fine with that, non-humans need not apply, and the fact that he's only concerned by that, he's not outright driving that as like the point of his whole anti-current situation campaign. Why is that not something that's more of a red light in his mind? It just kind of it's like this line that just gets put into the paragraph and glossed over as like this. Oh, this is a negative thing. That's not the core of his entire focus. Why not? I think
he is dismayed by all this. I'll defend him there. I think he's disgusted by all of this. But he is a politician and he has to play politics here.
Yeah, it specifically points out how he's not going to sit back and play the kind of gentle politician here. It specifically points that he's going to make a stand here, and I get that now. But that's more of like the overall situation that he's talking about. It's not this. To me, it seems odd.
Well, that isn't. But that isn't the main situation. Like the main situation is this man who's making all these crazy reforms is still in power for some reason, and not enough people are like trying to get him out.
Absolutely, and I get that. Just that seems like more of a red light that comes up in the book, I think.
There's a little passage from the Book of Sith, Palpatine's Manifesto, Absolute Power at the tail end. I want to quote here. Overnight, the Republic had a class of military elites who swore their loyalty to the Supreme Chancellor. The senators feared that being painted as disloyal would make them unelectable, so they supported measures to dismantle all checks on centralized power. So, direct Palpatine himself, basically.
Not surprising given this current climate, but to me it feels like the arguments being framed by the loyalists should be more focused on something as alarmingly mental as non-humans need not apply, because that's just there's no possible defense for that. That would be the immediate way to put Palpatine and his situation on the back foot. Yeah, that would be immediate back foot material, because everyone in the humans are they're a dominant species in the galaxy, but they're not the only one. There are other dominant species. And so many more minorities in the represented in the Senate. That should seem like a way to unify them, even against Palpatine of all people.
Yeah,
but it was only it's a relatively minor point for the chapter overhaul. Anyway, I like that the way Bail and indeed the Loyalist Committee as a whole is presented as coming across here. The way they're driving forward, the naivete of Amidala, paired with the concern of Bail and Mon Mothma.
That's the part I don't like. I don't like her. She should be smarter than she is.
Any of the Padme stuff?
Yeah, well,
I feel like Padme gets undercut in most Star Wars medium.
Yeah, this is one of the examples, or this is an example of where she comes across one of the best, in my opinion. Not in this situation specifically, but this how I can get why she's being an idiot, because she has more familiarity with Palpatine, at least at this stage. Also, the connection to Anakin. I do think that it's a bit odd that we don't get more of a groundwork for her reaction in Revenge of the Sith.
She's like a doughy-eyed fangirl or whatever. She's not shrewd politician mode at all. So I disagree. I think it's poorly written.
Yeah, I don't like that side. But to me, the idea that she's more... Yeah, so I should put that across. Sorry, the execution I completely agree, but the idea of her being more on board with Palpatine at this stage, to me, makes sense. I think that could have it should have been done better. You're right, but I think that could have been
the idea itself has merit, because she's got that personal connection to Palpatine and that personal connection to Anakin. She and Anakin have probably had a lot of long nights during their few weeks of time together over the past 3 years where they talked about the state of affairs, and Anakin was probably just being really hardcore pro-Palpatine, and Padme's inclined to listen because, well, it's like for most of her career, Palpatine has basically been the kindly uncle looking out for her.
You spoke, Antoine, about how you didn't like this chapter as much, or the Loyalist Committee politics stuff. I think what would have made it more interesting, and this entire idea, the execution better, would be the conflict being focused on Padme and how Bail and perhaps even Mon Mothma are turning her opinion of Palpatine. So that could have been a good focus. Conflict,
especially as a transition into Revenge of the Sith and what happens there and what they ask of her there. Because I believe the deleted scene material is in the book, right? Or am I crazy?
Revenge of the Sith
correctly.
Yeah, it's in there.
It is, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
It would have been a good kind of way to set up the impact of her disgust, to thunderous applause. That is a great line, even if the whole context is a bit off. This being a nice groundwork for that would have been good.
When has Padme been cool though? In any what's your favorite instance of Padme in the lore?
I don't know if I have one.
I can't recall one.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I think Clone Wars was the closest to serious development she ever had.
Yeah, the stuff with Clovis.
I'm not even kidding here.
But even then, it's so tight.
I'm not saying it was good. I'm just saying in terms of
Yeah, I don't even like that show. But the arc they did about the guy she was talking about in Attack of the Clones during the sand discourse, I don't like sand, that old flame of hers, that was an interesting arc. As someone who doesn't even like that show.
Yeah. So it may well be that, even if it is attached still to the whole terrible dynamic of Anakin and Padme.
Because it's hard to say what's her standout moment, because even when there's all this interesting this political intrigue going on, she's blushing about how much she misses Anakin and Anakin and
that gets me she's more than that. She's not about her man. She's got to be her own woman, especially if she's supposed to be the mother of Leia.
I was just gonna say she's nowhere near as savvy and cool as her daughter, so it's whatever. I'm over her.
It's
clearly Bail's influence.
Padme is a character I understand. I get why she is the way she is, and to me she is believable, but the problem is that she's not compelling. She's just, I don't want to say pathetic, but that's the direction I'm driving in.
She's close to in how she's thematically set up, unfortunately. You can see what she should be. There's enough there that you can see the way where they were kind of trying to steer her, but no author really captures and drives that home. It's always tainted by the overall presentation of how she came across in the films, which is a real shame, because there are moments where she could be as good as Leia. She just never is.
I mean, what is her personality? Does she really have one? I think that's the main problem.
Queenly politician when she's at her best, I think. But that's about
she's
it.
just she's sort of blandly good, but like in sort of an unspecific way, you know?
Yeah.
There's no kind of defining trait, like a passion for a specific thing outside of, like you said, being good that really, stands out. It's a shame. I do like Mon Mothma here, though. She's not exactly massively delved into, but everyone's favourite linchpin of the New Republic. I like that the kind of parallel she has with Bale, how she mentions, we finally have an audience with Palpatine, and it's, he'd just 5 minutes previously been musing about how it is, an audience rather than an appointment these days. I like how
because at this point Palpatine's becoming increasingly reclusive, and
I also like the thematic idea or undertone of the loyalist committee being made up of the people who effectively built the rebellion. Yeah. I do like that.
That's what one of you mentioned earlier, like sort of like the ease with which everyone accepted the horrible changes around them and how that disheartened him. But that's because like he's got like that's the language of rebellion right there in his head,
In a way, I think that if the Clone Wars and the Separatist Crisis had been allowed to play out naturally without the Sith intervention, basically the loyalists, as they are presented here, are the ones who probably would have ended up becoming the Separatists because they wanted to extricate themselves from Republic corruption and create a new government that actually, lived up to the principles, whereas this one just didn't.
It was one of the things that Clone Wars as well did pretty well. It didn't really dive into it in any great length, but it did show you the idea of the Separatists and how it was supposed to be a positive movement, and why there were so many planets a part of it, despite the horrific conflict of the war. With the woman who kind of champions the cause in that episode, where they show for some reason the Separatist government and building is effectively the House of Parliament from Britain for whatever reason. That kind of establishes that they could have been good, and I like that. I can't remember her name, but that would be where Amidala and Bale and Mon Mothma would be. You're right. If the kind of framing of the ideology had been different, and the Sith hadn't been at the helm, obviously.
I think there are lots of. Sorry,
but instead, the way the Sith made the war work is instead of it being a moral conflict between the people who wanted to stay true to the principles of the Republic versus the corrupt who wanted to keep, just lining their pockets, what the Sith did is they turned it into a conflict between law and chaos. Either you're a lawful individual who stays true to the Republic and becomes a servant of the Empire, or you're a chaotic individual who joins the Separatists and is thrown under the bus with the rest of them. Like, in the very simplistic terms, that's basically what the Sith did. They switched it over from, kind of a moral conflict to being, what would be a word for the paradigm between law and chaos? But yeah, basically paradigm shift.
So I think that there's valid, like lots of smaller, like moral, there's a lot more gray area, like the further down, like the rungs you go, like on the boots on the ground level, like there are separatists who have like a point. It's like the leadership that sucks. They're the people that are miring all this and like this bullshit war that doesn't really matter anymore. Because they're just pointlessly corrupt or hopelessly corrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. This chapter definitely gets that across in a nutshell. Even just to the level of them turning up for the appointment and Palpatine not seeing them. He plays it off later as not his fault, but that was very much an intentional slight. You can feel that from behind the scenes.
So we're moving on from this?
Yeah, moving on to chapter 11. Obi-Wan and Yoda's conversation, which I very much enjoyed. This is kind of
This is interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's sort of Yoda comes to investigate like the information himself because he's Yoda and he wants to get the big picture here because they found something that's linked to like this shadowy Sidious figure. And he kind of debriefs Obi-Wan about sort of like 3 years too late about like what the Jedi have been doing and like the investigation that they've been quietly, probing into like the Senate and taking, all this information, these names that we know, Sidious, Tyrannus, Sifo-Dyas, this bounty hunter who's somehow playing both sides, this Jango Fett, like what was he doing? And just sort of like, it's interesting how well this was done, where they got across, okay, here's what the Jedi know, and here's why they haven't put the pieces together. I don't quite get like why the implication is that Obi-Wan isn't privy to all this. He should be at this point. This is like right before Revenge of the Sith. He's on the council, whatever. But at the same time, I do like that the Jedi have been trying to figure this out, because that baffles me. Like that boggles my mind when you watch just the movies. It seems like the council has their thumb up their ass and they're waiting to die. They are not being proactive at all. But I love stories that show that they have been trying to sort all this out.
I recently reread Darth Maul Shadowhunter, because researching Darth Maul for my last video, and one of the things I found really interesting was reading this, and just the implication from the other sources I've read as well, is that there were probably a lot of Jedi who found out little aspects of the Sith schemes, but the problem is that they weren't able to come together and collect notes and start connecting the dots, because they didn't know that there were dots to connect. They just thought that they found out, oh, it's another creepy-ass slavery smuggling ring, not realizing that, oh, they're probably smuggling people to Sojourn for Darth Plagueis' experiments. Stuff like that.
Yeah, and this one, this particular book is the first, well, not the first, one of the primary times we see them making actual headway. Like Matt said earlier, you know, this is the backdrop to the investigation that's been going on for years, and this is where they're finally starting to realize some results. You know, even with Mace saying, you've been working on that code for years, you know, even small things like that. This is where we're starting to see everything come together for them. You know, directly before the fall.
It's interesting how we see that Yoda has to sort of have the mind of a politician too, because you know when he talks about how like they took a hard look at the Senate and they risked a lot by doing that, because they can be seen as well who knows, like they can be seen as corrupt themselves, they can be seen as being too suspicious and break alliances where like it's no longer based on trust. They can be seen as trying to take over, you know, like there's all kinds of things that he has to have like this calmer, cooler, slower, and less obvious approach in terms of investigating the Senate, even though, and Dooku said, like, there's a Sith in control, but like, can you trust what a Sith Lord says? I mean, he's telling the truth, but like, because he's a Sith,
he's
you can
presenting
understand
it
like,
as a red herring, so that way it's like basically, you know, it's Palpatine's strategy of hiding in plain sight, because one of the things I love, like skipping ahead to Revenge of the Sith, is Mace Windu saying that the only reason why Palpatine wasn't suspected of being the Sith Lord is because, for all intents and purposes, he already ruled the galaxy, basically saying that they expected the Sith Lord to be a lot less obvious, a lot subtler, a lot more delicate. But instead, they weren't expecting Palpatine to use the Exar Kun strategy on purpose.
And chapters discussions like these kind of flesh out the differences between Yoda's approach, which is what the Jedi did, versus what Mace was saying they should do, which we can get more into in the Revenge of the Sith novel, because there's a whole chapter about that called Masters. It's one of my favorites, where they just talk. They just talk about what's going on. It's also. Go ahead.
Sorry, this does highlight that they were trying to do stuff behind the scenes, even during the previous years. It wasn't just the pocket of the story. We're learning that they have been we're retroactively learning, but we're still learning that the Jedi have been doing things. So it's not just a case of they was just hand wave it, it's fine. Oh, clone army, who cares? They've been investigating behind the scenes. It just hasn't been the focus of any particular story until now. There was a side point as well that I wanted to bring up for discussion, because it isn't particularly clear what Yoda means, but there's a line where he says that the Sith were never absent. They were always present. They were kind of thing. Did he mean that as a retroactive acknowledgement of their mistake, or did he mean they always knew and it was never public knowledge?
I think the first, because that's the one that seems more believable to me. Because of the way the Phantom Menace portrayed them, they were like certain that Qui-Gon was like tripping, like that wasn't no Sith.
Yeah, they've been gone forever. How are they going to be back?
See, for me, I agree that's definitely makes sense given what was presented and the framework of what we've seen before. But to me, the second is the more likely if you look at just what it should have happened. So to me, I'm like half and half on each for me.
Actually, my position is that one of the reasons for why the Jedi were so against, the Council was so against Qui-Gon when he said that he ran into a Sith Lord, is because a certain aspect of it was them being in denial. Because
I agree. I 100% agree. Like Didn't Mace even say something like, I don't believe like the Sith could have returned without our being
Without
aware?
us knowing, yeah.
Didn't he say something like that?
Because the thing is, they don't want to contradict. They don't.
I know, but it's bad writing, Callan. George Lucas wrote this. Like, I mean,
that's what I mean. That's why I'd rather take this as being as like the fix for that. That's what I'm saying. That's why I like the line.
I definitely see it more as Yoda being like, in retrospect, Obi-Wan, they were never really gone. Like, we just didn't have our eyes on the situation, which goes all the way back to the beginning of the line, because like as soon as Darth Bane wiped everyone out, the Jedi were like, well. That Sith business is concluded, and like one of them was like, shouldn't we please like investigate this maybe? No, I mean that's what happened more or less.
It's just so un-Jedi. I have always hated it.
I think the big thing to consider is that it basically comes down to the fact that the Jedi are still people. It's like for all of their training, for all of their discipline, they're still people, and they can still make mistakes on the basis of wishful thinking.
Yeah, but that's why everyone always says that they're flawed and they're people and they're not, they're not flawless. I don't mean to imply that they are, but they are, elite, super genius masters of philosophy, ethics, combat. These are not the average layman's people. These guys are not going to go.
For that reason, any preconceived notions they have about anything, they are going to cling to as holy writ, because they know for a fact that they're super genius, powerful people directly connected to the will of God, basically. And for something to be going on without their knowledge, for them to not be aware of the Sith, is to force them to question everything about themselves, which is something that so few Jedi are willing to do because of the way the Order is set up. They are very doctrine.
But even when part of what makes them super genius, elite masters, is the fact that they are always focusing on avoiding pride, questioning things, and trying to develop their own path. These aren't people who just reach a point and blinkers on.
My belief is that a lot of their attempts to avoid these emotions basically it's like they become so committed to being humble that what they end up creating is a posturing humility where it's all about trying to show off how humble you are. It's like that's the mentality that a lot of them are working under.
See, I just disagree with that being the case for actual Jedi Masters. I don't see how that could be the predominant reality for the greatest of the Jedi. I mean, I'm not denying that seems to be what comes across in how it's presented in the overall works of the prequels, thanks to, again, George Lucas's bad writing. But any story with, Dark Rendezvous, any story with Yoda being written properly, I'm sorry, that kind of mentality is completely impossible for him, as far as I'm concerned. He can be flawed. A good example of a good fault that's brought up in this book later on is his even in this scene, I think, is his connection to Dooku and how he was blinded by, he didn't want to believe it. I can understand that on a personal level, but when it comes to, the stuff that means, we're not going to investigate this, this potential threat, it's not real. Nah, it can't happen. Impossible. That to me is so fundamentally ridiculous for anyone who would consider themselves a Jedi Master. Even if it was the tiniest, minutest possibility, you start investigating it. It's not like it would take any effort on their part.
Well, that was the thing, is like, that's why I didn't agree with you when you were saying you were on the fence, like, what did Yoda mean? Did he mean the former or the latter? The reason I say the former is because they didn't investigate nothing. They just sent Qui-Gon back to do the investigation when they didn't trust his report in the first place. So I was like, okay, whatever.
It's so much was brought on by bad writing in the prequels. It's a pain.
Well, the thing is that how much it goes back to what we said in our last podcast. It's like how much of it is bad writing, how much of it is direct intention, how much of it is George Lucas not knowing how to write Jedi, and how much of it is him intentionally presenting the Order as super, super flawed and in a lot of ways digging its own grave.
I think like an 80-20 split, with like 80% bad writing on his part. But whatever, that's just me.
Mm. But I like the scene overall and the other stuff it's discussing. The nature of their investigation with Kamino and Fett and all that stuff. It helps explain what was absent between Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith, the films. And
and the thing is that scenes like this, if they were in the movies would be so much better, because it's like they just need a scene where the characters just start talking about the situation and basically trying to hash things out, and in so doing, summarize things for the audience.
I agree. I mean, you guys mentioned this already on Grievous's end, where like this book, if it was on screen, would have fleshed out and explained Grievous, who just walked on screen. Dooku kind of just walked on screen. Who the fuck is he?
Mm-hmm.
Like this conversation.
We get his history in this chapter as well.
Yeah. Though one thing I will say in defense of Attack of the Clones is that they at least do discuss Dooku a lot leading up to his appearance, and they do give us some details of his past, specifically him being an ex-Jedi.
They discuss him a bit. I don't think they discuss a lot.
Just enough to give us context, and then Christopher Lee picks up the slack.
No, he's good, but it doesn't explain.
We'll get to that when we do the direct commentaries. I think I agree to get that. Like, you get at least a basis of it, but definitely. I mean, I think a lot of people give more credit to the prequels because they're so bad, and then you rewatch it, and since you know everything that surrounds it, like for me, like I think I enjoy Revenge of the Sith because of all the baggage I bring with it, not because as a standalone movie it works. But because like I just can't, I subjectively go into that like knowing everything else that I bring with that kind of situation. So I think that happens quite often with the movies.
I mean, for me, it's like it's fine if you enjoy the story because of what you're calling baggage or just like your overall knowledge. But you can't fairly defend the film by claiming it's all portrayed in the film because it's not.
Yeah. End of the day, that's pretty much the reason why I'm an expanded universe fan first, movie fan second.
Me too.
And that sounds silly to me because it's the original movies to me that actually are movies. I feel like those are the only ones that are actually like really Star Wars, and the rest is like playing at being Star Wars.
Film wise, yeah, absolutely, I agree. The prequels. Again, we've said before, they're masterpieces waiting to happen, but they need this shifting left, that shifting right, that bit rewriting. It's all of the expanded universe stuff that makes them actually Star Wars.
Right, that's what makes the prequels actually work for me, is because of everything around it, not because of the movies themselves.
Yeah, lots of interesting ideas, just poor execution. Is there anything else from Chapter 11 we want to discuss? Oh, yes,
I like that, like, when Jedi speak, they talk about their military campaigns and not the Force anymore, which is like kind of like heartbreaking if you really think about it, because that's what they're supposed to do, is like kind of just talk about like existence and like you were saying before, like I don't think they're geniuses in the sense of like intellect, but I do think they're supposed to be geniuses of intuition and wisdom. Just the interpersonal wisdom and interpersonal relationships between all living things. So for them to have conversations about like their past military campaign is just like, no, that's not what you're supposed to be doing, you know. And then, or like they lost the art of their building their sabers, like that was a little note that was in this chapter that I thought
that was one thing I wanted to
really
mention
heartbreaking
too.
To me as well.
It's that modern lightsabers were being designed to withstand the rigors of war, not to be an expression of their wielder's mentality. And the sad thing is I actually consider the lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi to be the finest example of that idea, because the lightsaber he wields in Revenge of the Sith is a practical piece of equipment.
And he's the one making the observation as well, which is what kind of highlights the tragedy. Is that, you know, lightsabers are being built that way now, and look at mine.
Yeah, and it's like, it's kind of interesting in that Kenobi is like noticing all of this stuff and realizing that he himself is also guilty of it. And it was one of my favorite little details in the Attack of the Clones novel, if you'll allow me to make a reference, where he's meditating on the Force, trying to piece things together for himself. And he's like, with a tool like the Force, how can the Jedi be built? But then he realizes, wait, I just thought of the Force as a tool.
It's an easy mistake to make, even for someone like Obi-Wan.
But
the final point I wanted to close on for this chapter was the query of the point Yoda makes about, nonsense. Warriors we have always been. I like that because it's a thing that kind of gets glossed over a lot, how the Jedi are always referred to as peacekeepers, which they are, first and foremost.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're not also warriors. They're not in the military. Mm-hmm. That's why they refer to themselves as not being soldiers. But that does not mean they're just peaceful monks that, are avoiding conflict all the time. They have always been
Jedi Knights.
Yeah, precisely. They've always been Jedi Knights. They've always been ready to answer the call to action. That's always been the case.
I think his use of the word... I think his use of the word warrior, though, is like maybe inappropriate.
Well, actually, I like it because it's a direct counterpoint to what we see in the film, and it's actually kind of a show of how Yoda's mentality changed between being Grandmaster and being the exile. Order 66 changed him.
Yeah, but he's 800-something years old. To me, he should already have the perspective of wars not make one great.
Indeed.
I don't.
Well, I think that still applies here. Like, just because he's saying that they are warriors doesn't mean that is what makes them great. I don't think that's at all. He says
in the films, like, we can fight. We can't fight a war from you. Like, we're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. Like when he says warrior, I don't know. Like, to me, that's just the wrong term.
It invokes the wrong image, and I agree with that. To me, it would have been better for him to say knight or something similar. You know, we've always been knights. We've always been protectors or defenders or guardians, something like that. Just something that invokes less of a offensive, aggressive, idea in your head, image in your head. But at the same time, regardless of the terminology, which I agree with, was a bit wrong. The idea of it, the fact that they are these capable combatants has always been true. It's always been the case, and I think that is it's important that Yoda specifically says, nonsense. This is the case. That's the mentality he's bringing, and
I think it's I think it's the context, and I think that's the context that I'm okay with in that sense. Is that he's using it as like a rebuttal, not just on its own. Like he's not just saying like straight up, yeah, no, we're warriors, but it's more in the context of like the Clone Wars themselves.
It's also saying he's also saying that, well, the thing is that Jedi aren't warriors first and foremost, but they are warriors because the whole point behind a Jedi is that you do have many roles. Whatever is necessary for you to serve the galaxy, you do. It's like whether that's serving as a diplomat or whether that's kicking in the front door and being an enforcer.
I agree with what you guys are saying. It's just, to me, it leaves like a bad taste because of who's saying it, but also like what he says it in response to. Is like he's almost like talking about how under that philosophy, the Jedi are like guaranteed to play into the Sith's hands because Obi-Wan's saying maybe Dooku didn't believe that we would, actually become generals. And he's like, Yoda's like pridefully saying, well, that's nonsense. We've always been warriors. On the separatist side, it'd be like the Jedi are stupid fools. They're going to take the role of generals when really they shouldn't, but they're going to do that because they're bound to, It's like ironic to me. Like Yoda should see the bigger picture. Somebody else should have said that line for me. A different council master, not Yoda.
Okay. I'm kind of half and half between. Like I can see him saying it like that, or at least saying because he's more saying, of course the Jedi would jump to the defense of the Republic. Of course the Jedi would jump to counter this evil. Is the kind of idea I got from it.
He is saying that. I disagree. He is saying that. Yeah.
But. Yeah, I can agree. It does leave a bad taste in the mouth in the way it's presented. There should have been. If it was still Yoda saying it, there should have been a third person here that was maybe even Mace that was kind of shaping the context a bit better to make it more to make Yoda's
point
for Mace.
That makes a lot more sense too.
Very true.
That'd be a better line for Mace.
Yeah, we do not fight for peace. We fight for justice. That's always been a Mace thing, which is kind of poignant too. But yeah, then we get a bit of a jump from to Anakin as while Obi-Wan and Yoda are off talking about this.
Yeah.
Anakin is pondering,
intimidating some technicians.
Yeah, he's kind of frustrated with them and nervous because of what the chair represents. In terms of tracing the Sith origins. We see a little one of those. We get this quite often in the works. An early little nod to Vader and how he can very easily slip into that "I enjoy fear" role. But at the same time, it's not tainting his positive hero image that we've said before. This book is capturing for him because of how he's like immediately guilty and he looks away, and he feels ashamed. It's a moment of weakness for him, and it's a highlight of that knife's edge rather than pointing out this guy is completely unstable, which I like.
It's a hint.
Yeah. Also, I found it interesting that he considered if the Jedi had never come to Tatooine. I would have still have left. I would have still got us out of that hell, but I would have been, a pod racer, a gambler. I wouldn't have had the Force. I found that as like an interesting what if for Anakin to consider, because he'd been too old to join the Order. And the thing that kind of stops that trail of thought in its tracks and how he's pondering it is the fact, I wouldn't have met Padme. Because again, it always comes down to Padme of Anakin and his motivations.
Yeah. Because, it goes back to what I was saying in our part 2 of the Clone Wars micro-series review. It's both Anakin and Padme put each other up on pedestals, and it's like they're so caught up in the idea of one another that they're not paying attention to the actuality. And this is a perfect example of that. It's like, this isn't love, this is obsession. It's like the idea of some alternate universe where his mother is still alive, and he's like, nope, fuck that. There's no Padme. I want Padme.
She's my angel. It's even brought up in this book. It's like I called her an angel.
He had thought of her as an angel, arrived on Tatooine from the moons of Viago. Ugh. A playful remark on his part, but not as entirely innocent as it had sounded.
God. But yeah, then the chapter ends with Palpatine, manipulating him again, because once again Palpatine always steps in just as he's made a mistake or is confessing something he's guilty about, or Anakin always unintentionally just spoon feeds Sidious all of the material he needs to manipulate him in the end. It kind of helps sell the tragedy in an ironic sense.
Yeah, it's like Anakin wouldn't have turned out nearly as badly if Palpatine hadn't been there to egg him on. But at the end of the day, Palpatine has been egging him on for a while.
And with ease, because it's Anakin, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's basically that chapter. Does anyone else have anything to add? Or we can move on from that one. Chapter 13 is when we get the Loyalists Committee versus Palpatine, which I find interesting because Palpatine's actually right here. Even though obviously he's doing it for the wrong reasons, what he's saying isn't wrong. Should they... The committee is basically saying that they want him to reel back on some of the executive powers he has, which completely makes sense. That's fine. But they're also talking about peace with the Separatists, and he raises the point of how are we going to do that? Because if we concede or try to sue for peace, we have to concede worlds, and that means conceding worlds that don't want to be separatist to their cause that has been taken by force, and they don't really have a counter to that, because he is right that would be the only option, and that's wrong. What do you guys think?
He's a politician for a reason. I mean, he's good at it.
Yeah. He's not wrong in this instance.
But it's interesting
standpoint.
The conversation, like the way that the conversation is portrayed, it's like Bail even sees that every chance that Palpatine's given, he spins the issue into something like off topic to sort of distract them from what they really. We're here to talk about you, sir. But he keeps making it about like the war as a whole. Because they can't outright accuse him of anything because they all have to play politics here.
Yeah, which is easy to understand because he's always bringing the reason the defense he's got for his executive power is the crisis of the war. So it's so easy for him to spin it that way. But then the topics get out of control because it's such a mired discussion.
Which he makes it. He feeds that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I like how it played out.
But I take your point. He does have good points. I mean, who's going to decide what worlds get ceded back to like who we took them from? What if they don't want to be? Like what are you talking about? Like, how do we do this?
Yeah, and they have no answer, and they have no answer, which I like because these aren't these guys have good intentions, and they're obviously the good guys in the situation. They always are these particular set of leaders, but at the same time, that doesn't mean they have the right answer for the problem at hand. Not that Palpatine does, because he's an asshole. But at least in this argument, if you took everything you know about both out of the equation, he is right.
They have the right idea, but they don't have the right ammunition to attack his arguments. Like he knew what they were going to say, and he already had all these roadblocks in place, and they can't quite get through them. They can't. They're trying to move it to a spot can we at least talk about this? And he's cutting it off before they get to that point. That's what's frustrating them. So that's why they keep trying at different avenues, trying to do it. And he's not having it because Palpatine.
And I like that it's Bail and brings it back to the focus point. Nope, reel it back. These are problems we can't solve. We want to specifically talk about this point that we want to raise. Are we allowed to raise this for debate? And he's like, yeah, sure. I won't challenge it because he knows there is no way in hell that they're going to get that passed. Just from the nature of the Senate, he doesn't have to do anything. He will remain neutral because he knows he will win anyway. And even if he doesn't, it's not exactly like he's going to be losing much because it's not that big a deal that's being discussed. It's almost like the idea of the monitoring in the building is a roadblock unto itself that he's trying to get the Senate and the voices against him to focus on so that they don't look at anything else or talk about anything that actually matters. There's a lot of layers to this this kind of conflict between the two, and once again Palpatine's pulling all of the strings. This book does a good job of selling that idea. Where other works kind of don't.
And it's also one of those chapters that's so interesting to read, knowing who and what Palpatine is, because he's such a troll. It's so subtle, yet
sometimes it's subtle.
Sometimes it's subtle, but often his tactics in a debate basically just turns into trolling the opposition. It's and this chapter kind of proves that.
Even just leaving them to wait outside for as long as he did.
Yeah. Or I mean, Pestage is his secretary basically. So that's not that's a good,
The one little bit where it's Palpatine turns to Pestage and says, "I wasn't informed that these senators were out here for an appointment with me." And Pestage is like, "Oh, I didn't want to overburden you. Your schedule was so full." And I'm just reading that and I'm just like, They totally rehearsed that.
Absolutely.
5 years ago.
Sidious knew they were out there.
Yeah.
Or Palpatine did.
They rehearsed it 3 weeks ago when the appointment was booked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing,
It's like, okay, you
that's
stand
actually my
there and I'll say.
that's my favorite thing about Palpatine and Pestage. It's the fact that Pestage, he's Palpatine's BFF. Like, he's the one guy that Palpatine genuinely regards as a friend and is taken into his confidence. And they just play off each other so well, and they just love it.
I love the idea of a robot chicken skit where they
Do I need to sing the
literally
song again?
where they do literally do that whole scene. Where, okay, so I will stand here and you'll say this, and this is where I'll lead you. I'll tag you here, and you can say this, and it'll and then they just go. They pat you on the back and walk down the room. You can just see that.
Yeah. The cool thing, though, like, is also that I don't like characters that coast through everything, like, and don't have to try. I like that this book portrays, it like shows the game that Palpatine is playing, like, every minute of every day. Like, it's not easy to do this. You know, he's got to have his game face on at all times. And I enjoyed the amount of effort and forethought that's going into how he's playing everybody, not just the Jedi, but these people as well.
Even to the point where he's deliberately letting not the mask, but deliberately letting the idea of the mask crack, so that people like Bale can have something to focus on and say, "Oh, so you seem like the congeal, you know, or you seem to have a lot of congeniality with you, and you know you're pacifist and gentle, but then you also have that hard edge of devotion. You gradually shifted to this idea, and he has this kind of all of the suspicions that would otherwise be levered against him are focused on this idea, this kind of secondary mask that Palpatine put on when the war had started up, and you know the crisis situation had developed. He's going to that level to convince these people that he's actually a real person and not to blame. You know, Bale specifically notes Palpatine is not to blame for this. Despite all of his flaws that I have with him, he's not to blame. When he obviously 100% is, he just doesn't know it. It's that level that Palpatine is going to.
And that little shift also brings to mind something that was in the art design for the prequel trilogy themselves. When we look at Palpatine's offices and apartments in Episode 1, it's like it's all bright red interior. Like, obviously red, color of blood, war, fire, evil, but it's also a warm, comfortable space. Like the sort of space where you could hang out, have a nice time, and not worry about anything. But as the series moves along, Palpatine's office spaces shift over to grays and blacks, and then we finally get the Return of the Jedi, where that throne room is just pure metal. And it's the shift in Palpatine himself and his approach to things. It's like he's getting away from the soft and cuddly and getting more towards hard-edged.
He's shifting from Chancellor to, you know, regal
Emperor.
King, and then to Emperor. Yeah, it's that kind of transition stage for layers of mask that he's peeling away. The other thing I want to mention this scene even is that this is the second time in the book where I've gone, I do not buy that. That's forced and contrived as all hell. And it's the line from Ikwe saying, "Might it appear that the Jedi are trying to perpetuate this war?" Where the hell is that coming from? No, that would not feel that way. Why would she say that?
That's the sort of thing that would be said by one of Palpatine's cronies to put the idea in someone's head. Not something that would be said by a loyalist senator, and we know that Ikwe is a loyalist senator. Anyone who knows anything about her.
Yeah, she's just...
Palpatine actually kind of does say this as well, so it's weird that they just didn't have him say it. You know, like he has a whole talk about how common people can't tell the difference between Dooku and the Jedi anyway, because he was one, you know?
Yeah. It just doesn't make sense coming from her in this situation. It's so forced.
That's actually a nice little connection to the Jedi Civil War, because one of the things talked about there is that people didn't really know the difference between the Jedi and the Sith. They're just all people with lightsabers. Who the fuck cares what they think? They fucked shit up, to hell with them.
Yeah, he's trying to kind of push this idea that the Jedi and the Sith are all effectively the same, and the separate them from the idea people have towards them in the public consciousness. Move them to this just mire of, oh, we don't care, get these annoying pesky pests out of the way so we can deal with, governing the world or the galaxy. But yeah, that leads us to the close of this scene with Palpatine referencing
Palpatine
Anakin.
basically derails the entire conversation by turning to Senator Amidala and then referencing C-3PO, who's standing next to her, and saying, "Senator Amidala, is that not the droid Jedi Skywalker constructed?"
Yeah, it's so completely out of nowhere as well. You can imagine his head just snapping to the side and go, "Isn't that the C-3PO that was built by Anakin?" It's like, why? Why are you doing this?
It's a perfect example of Palpatine's troll. He derails the whole thing by just taking out the linchpin player in the Loyalist Committee that is Padme by making her think about Anakin, just crumbling her into mush.
To be fair, I wouldn't
really
call
don't
her
like
the
about
linchpin
this,
here. To me, Bail is the linchpin. At least how it's presented here, anyway. But sorry.
I would agree with that, but Padme is still... She's one of those people where it's like she may not have much to say, but she's still an important face.
Yeah, she's the single point of failure for this group in this moment. You know, he's attacking her so that he can... Now that he's conceded the whole "I'll remain neutral in the debate" thing, he doesn't want them to push on anything else, so we're just like, oh, now I'll derail. Let's segue away.
Yet in this sequence, she instantly gets flustered and even blushes, to which Palpatine even calls her out on doing. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
It is one of the little points. It is one of the tiny little details where the Dark Lord trilogy doesn't connect together perfectly, because two separate authors, two different writing styles, two different mentalities. Like, we get a lot of little differences in characterization. Like, the big one is Dooku in Labyrinth of Evil versus Dooku in Revenge of the Sith. It's like, in Labyrinth of Evil, well-intentioned extremist who's gone completely over the deep end. In Revenge of the Sith, Littlefinger. Well, Littlefinger. Well, in terms of the degree of malice, like, not in the... It's like Palpatine in the Revenge of the Sith novelization is, Dooku in the Revenge of the Sith, derp, he's a lot more vindictive, whereas Dooku in Labyrinth of Evil is a lot more measured.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it when we get to that book, but the only thing that really strikes me about Dooku in that book is that he's speciest, which for a Jedi of like his caliber just seems weird. Like,
In fact, that's actually one thing I don't quite get. It's like, I can totally get how the basic citizens of the galaxy would be speciesists, but people connected to the Force being speciesists, because as a Force wielder, as far as I'm concerned, the only power that matters is power in the Force. Your physical body is irrelevant. What does it matter what species you are? And it's like, to me, that seems... Yeah. It seems to me that's a sort of mentality that all Force wielders should have, even Sith Lords, because it's like, the dark side is everything.
The amount of alien Jedi that he has respected, it just flies in the face of it. It's weird.
A lot.
Yeah. But anyway, are we done?
That seals off that chapter.
Yeah, that seals off 13 easily. Just the idea of Palpatine talking about blushing. God, that must have been so awkward for Mothma and Organa. But yeah, that leads us to chapter 14, which is the Anakin questioning the Order's ways again, because he's thinking in his head, kind of out of nowhere, but he's just thinking about all the the qualities that he disagrees with the Order and how it operates.
The thing I find interesting about Anakin's criticisms of the Order is that he's got a point in his criticisms. The problem is that he doesn't have any real solutions to propose. It's like, I think he's like on the money when it comes to talking about what's wrong with the Jedi, but his ideas for what they should do instead are just like, dude, are you insane? It's like Kenobi says, as Anakin says, by going farther with the Force than we allow ourselves, by riding its crest. Obi-Wan responds, Master Sora Bulk and many others would agree, Anakin, but few Jedi have the stomach for such a ride. We're not all as self-composed as Yoda or Master Windu. And,
He's talking the way Dooku talked in the Plagueis novel.
Yeah.
I like the discussion that's been going on, like the idea of Obi-Wan conceding that Anakin is, to an extent right, but at what cost? I like that's the focus. He's not saying, no, you're wrong. This leads to the dark side. It's just a case of, if you can handle it, but not many people can. And to be honest, least of all you. Not that he says that.
Yeah. And it's like, Anakin's criticisms are correct, but he's got no solutions, and that's basically his problem. He's a guy who thinks he's right about everything, and everyone should listen to what he has to say, but he doesn't really have much to say. He's a bit like Jason Solo in that regard.
Palpatine plays into that early on, doesn't he? I mean, he says, "You're right, of course, Anakin, that some people should have no rules attached to them and should be the ultimate powers. You know, you yourself are an example of this, of course. But we must always remember to keep our heads on." You know, it's like, oh God, stop feeling that ego, and Anakin, stop lapping it up. But yeah, this is the kind of mentality that lets Palpatine do that, because he does believe in that, you know, Vader, iron-fisted control.
Is this the one where is this the conversation where they talk about like deception, or like the Jedi's capacity for deception as well? Mm-hmm. I thought so. So I mean, it's sort of like, it's a little ham-fisted on both counts, because Obi-Wan's he's not giving him the most rational or cogent reasons, you know, to not think that way. He's just kind of saying, well, what you're talking about is like Sith behavior, and we don't do that because Sith is bad. It's kind of a platitude in and of itself, which is why the argument is kind of cyclical. Yeah, you know?
He's saying we're not a cult, Anakin. We don't just blindly follow our leaders, which is true, but it's not really what Anakin is saying.
Right. And it's also a nice little way of referencing forward to the discussion in Revenge of the Sith on the Mustafar landing platform after Padme's on the ground. The thing I find interesting about that discussion is that it's essentially Anakin is attacking Obi-Wan with harsh realities, whereas Obi-Wan is responding with Jedi platitudes. And it seems like this has probably been the pattern of their discussions for years, where Anakin's saying, but Master, the galaxy's dark and evil with all of these horrible things in it, and sometimes we got to be dark and evil ourselves to not get dead. And Obi-Wan's response usually boils down to, but Jedi.
Yeah, those are the parts like where you sort of see the cracks in that master-student relationship, where maybe Qui-Gon would have been better suited to talk to Anakin about some of this, because he's a little more personable in that way and less doctrine.
The other thing is the fact that Qui-Gon would have probably shared a lot of Anakin's viewpoints. They would have found common ground, whereas the problem is that Obi-Wan himself is too lawful to, you know, be able to interact with Anakin on that level.
Qui-Gon would have recognized and acknowledged Anakin's rough edges a bit more than Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan sees himself too much in Anakin, in the way, not in the personality, but in the way he sees Anakin kind of overcoming his obstacles. Oh, Anakin has this problem. He'll get over it this way, the same way someone like I would. You know, he sees the Jedi in him that isn't really there. Partly because of love, partly because of his own experiences. You know, because Obi-Wan is that quintessential Jedi of the Order, understanding it and following the Council, but not unquestioningly so. He expects that you know, higher standard from everyone else, even Anakin, and it's the wrong way to go. Anakin needs those rough edges smoothing out by someone else, not himself.
I will say though that I'll give Obi-Wan credit, because at some point he realizes he's getting a little bit too much into that Jedi like rhetoric, and okay, I got to pull it back. Like, we're not flawless, including me. Even the way I'm talking right now is kind of bad.
I like that. He's like, even now, right now, I'm thinking, even as I'm acknowledging my flaws, I'm being flawed. And it's Yoda that interrupts that, and it's questionable whether or not that was intentional, because the way it comes across is like, you know, Yoda carries the weight. He says Obi-Wan carries the burden of the galaxy on his shoulders. You know, like, relax, Obi-Wan, it's fine. When really he should have been, nope, Obi-Wan, you're right. Feel that burden, because you need to respond to it right now, or problems are going to arise.
Yeah.
It's but Yoda intercedes, and then they bring in the discussion about the revelations of the chair they've had, and the traceability of it, and the path that is left behind for them to follow. Then we also get the end of that chapter, I believe, is the Padme sequence, right?
It's ridiculous. I mean, why does it do that?
Yeah.
It cuts back to that for no real reason, so she can completely awkwardly remember the first time they had dinner.
Yeah, it is really weird, but it's noted. I didn't so much enjoy it, but I found it interesting that she looks back on that dinner as Smee says, oh my God, Smee, whatever the hell her name is. Is it Smee or is it Smee, whatever. When she says he was meant to help you, Padme remembers it as her looking at her and referring to Padme itself. And then the prose even acknowledges, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. That's how she remembers it.
The funny thing is, I don't remember it, so it's fine. I don't care. But it's weird that she.
I'm pretty sure she's looking at Qui-Gon.
I mean, that could very well be. It's weird because it's like she's like conscious of the fact that, okay, she's like aware of the fact I'm romanticizing this in my head. Like, I mean, you don't do that. You romanticize without meaning to or realizing it. That's stupid.
Yeah. And the thing I do like about that, though, is that as stupid as it is, it's another aspect of Padme's character that makes her a bit believable. And it's ultimately the perfect example of her putting Anakin up on that pedestal. She's so caught up in the idea of Anakin that even when realizing that she's so caught up in that idea of Anakin and not the actuality, she's still like, but the idea.
It's wishful thinking, so it's highest form.
Yeah, I agree that it makes that she's putting him on a pedestal. I disagree that it makes her believable. I think it makes her a little unbelievable, but whatever.
It's unbelievable that she is just that blinkered, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially considering her level-headedness in all other areas. It's always been a bit of the problem with the relationship that's her mentality with Anakin. It doesn't fit. She's too mature for Anakin, or at least that relationship between those two. But that's the end of that chapter.
It's just down to the fact that Padme and Anakin got too close too quickly in a lot of ways, whereas they didn't get close enough in others. It's like they developed that undying emotional bond where, it's like, I'll burn entire worlds for you, but they never really found out who and what the other person was. And even the one time where they did have that political discussion, Padme's just like, sounds like a dictatorship to me.
Yeah, effectively. But yeah, that ends that chapter, and we lead on to chapter 15, where we finally get Grievous in all of his glory, dealing with Gunray returning and leading a
not before trolling with him just a little bit.
Yeah, I love Grievous's thought process here and how he's thinking, how he's acting, and this is perfect. This is Grievous. Thank you, more of this, please. It pains me to think that you could read this book and then go and watch the film and see, oh my god, that's the same guy. I mean, it's just,
You say more of this, please. There's 2 books where he's this way. Is this one and the next one? That's it.
It's basically it.
Yeah.
Plus,
it just makes me so sad. Grievous was such a missed opportunity because in the expanded universe, he was basically perfect. But then the movie went and dropped the ball, and then the Clone Wars series decided, we're going to base our version of Grievous off the movie. And
instead of picking up the ball, they just kicked it around on the floor for a bit.
Yeah.
Not
and
fun.
Just. Oh God!
But in this chapter, Anton, what are your thoughts on Grievous? Because you said you loved him in this book. What did you think of this particular section with him when he first is introduced?
So yeah, like I said before, towards the beginning, like I feel like this is actual Grievous or what he should be all the time, but he's not at all. But the main thing I was getting into was the military genius that he is, and just. Not even that he's toying with Newt, but then that he wants to see the ability of these new fighters that he hasn't seen before, the ARC 170s. And he's like, well, hold off. Let me. It felt like very Thrawn in that situation. Like, it's like, let me make this new assessment right now. I'm like, what? Grievous? I'm associating him with Thrawn? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me in most contexts. But it totally makes sense here in this situation. But yeah, that's all I have for that part until we get into like the next section.
Yeah, the Huck stuff. Yeah, no, I completely agree. The idea that he kind of recognizes, these are new. Let's see what we can do. Let's probe this a bit. I love that comes to mind and how kind of that's put in this front and center.
We also get some mention about how he's actually been around since Attack of the Clones and how he was actually present on Geonosis during the start of the war, which is interesting.
Yes,
the funny thing
he actually even killed some Jedi.
The funny thing is that I never played the game Star Wars Republic Commando until after I read this book. I knew about Grievous's rampage through the catacombs where he killed lots of Jedi. And as I was playing through the first act of that game on Geonosis where they go down into the catacombs, I was just terrified that they were going to have some super difficult General Grievous boss fight out of nowhere. Because I'm just like, I'm not ready for a fight with Grievous. Is Grievous going to pop out somewhere?
That was
I wouldn't so much have preferred a boss fight, but it would have been nice to maybe have had like a little bit of foreshadowing. It's like maybe like you hear like a clink, 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 clink going through the catacombs. I don't know. That'd be pretty interesting.
Or maybe finding a Jedi body that's been hacked apart with lightsabers and the lightsabers missing, and they're just like, the fuck? And then
I think that would have been very interesting.
Yeah, it would be very cool.
Anyway,
The other thing I take from this chapter is that he acknowledges that the bravery of the clones, and is like, if you hadn't traced us here and this wasn't such a strategic weakness now, I would have let you go. I would have acknowledged your bravery and I would have let you escape. I like that kind of concept of mercy is brought as well into the foreground with him as a character, because it's an interesting contrast to everything that makes him, so full of hate and bile towards the Jedi.
The one thing I will say, not to make this go on longer, but the one thing I will say is that it's in line with his character up to that point. Like, not anymore with other stuff, but even in the microseries, he respected the Jedi enough to give them a warrior's death. Prepare, it's in line for him to do stuff like that. Yeah,
I like how they always put that kind of not conflict, but that contrasting presentation for him. He's someone who values the warrior's mentality and honor and such.
He does it later in this book, like where there's a Jedi he kills that he comes close to pitying because it's so unfair, the situation she's in.
It's nice to see that mentality.
So, but he eventually does let Gunray come on, and we get a little meeting with the Separatists Council.
Yeah, where he just kind of prowls behind their chairs,
intimidates the living hell out of them.
Yeah, it's interesting because he was meant as a tool of intimidation as well. Initially, he was. We'll get back to that in the last chapter, but yeah, that's his original purpose by design. And he does it so effectively with these guys. Doesn't even really threaten them. He just says, I'm here as your protector. I'm here as your guardian. So you're all going to stay as a group, and you're going to do this. And they go, okay, shrinking into their seats.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
He says he will contact them in the usual manner, which in this case is the Techno chair.
Oh my god!
Gunray's like,
it's like, I'm not telling him. Are you telling him? Nope. Okay. I love it. It's again, it's so funny that's the thing that almost brings the grand plan crashing down.
Yeah. But one of the things I do like about this is that it does highlight how Grievous is effectively a proto-Vader, where it's like he's a creature that shouldn't exist, is built to be terrifying, and he doesn't even have to openly threaten you. The most innocuous statement becomes a horrifying death threat coming out of this thing's speaker.
Yeah, for sure. But that closes that chapter. We're leading into the... What number are we on now? 17th? 17th.
16.
16, yeah. Charos 4 with the 16th chapter. This is effectively a mini story in itself. We can just summarize this on the kind of purpose it serves, which is them finding confirming the source of the chair and getting the next sort of crumb for the scavenger chase hunt, as Matt said at the start of the episode. I like the culture.
The chariots and their building culture.
Yeah, I do love that culture. It was a really nice kind of idea that stands out from what we've seen in most of the Star Wars franchise. It's just like a unique kind of just single idea that he manifests as a mini exploration of the culture. It was like a window into that world. I liked how it was presented.
Fun. It's fun because it's got like you get like the hijinks like in like the wacky chase sequence, and you got like this sort of goofy protocol droid having to be like the the translator. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's got like all those classical Star Wars elements in it. So yeah.
And then
like
they also had the insect life form with the name that was almost impossible to pronounce.
Yeah.
Talak or something like that.
Yeah.
I wrote it down.
I practiced saying it about 5 times a few minutes ago. It was like Talalak, Slalak, Tathak.
Basically.
If you ever listen to the audiobook, it sounds like the guy said, all right, I will say it one time, and then like you take that recording and plug it everywhere else in the book that it appears.
Because holy hell.
It sounds exactly the same every time he says it. Like it's the same recording.
What's funny is he actually, like in the audio drama, he actually makes the clicks and whistles too. So that
which is nice. Yeah, because that's described in the book, and I thought, that's a nice touch.
So
but that's basically all
they
do.
Trying to get
they get that information, don't they?
They eventually get him. Yeah.
And that gives them the clue to the next one, who's where, like on the Escard. It's a Bith, right?
Yeah. Escard. Yeah, that's in the next set of chapters. That's part
and that ends Anakin and Obi-Wan's sequence for this segment of chapters.
Yeah. Bringing us to Mace and Yoda. We finally see Mace in action, so to speak, where they see the
to an intelligence officer.
Yeah, which I like. It was interesting having a non-Jedi or non-Force sensitive even discussing Sidious as well. Just using the name coming out of his mouth sounded odd. Like, oh, that's really weird. Not, this would have been someone who recognizes recognizes him, not Palpatine later on, if the name ever came up as an intelligence officer. Then we also get the reaction of Grievous coming up on screen for the hologram. It's like, is Gunray, you there? No? Quick, end transmission. I love that again, it's just so funny that is what brings them down, almost. I wish it had been. It would have been so perfect. Anything else in that chapter you want to cover? I know I'm missing something.
Velderone is brought up as the place that he wants to establish a base, and now the Jedi and the Republic know, so they're going to try and intercept.
Yeah, that's the basic summation. Is there anything that Mace and Yoda discussed that we've glossed over?
Yoda remarks how he thinks that Obi-Wan is kind of losing his focus, and Mace believes that the reason is because he's become Anakin's quote-unquote partisan. So that's kind of interesting.
I was about to mention that too, because it does demonstrate that Obi-Wan's blinkers problem with Anakin has not gone unnoticed. There are people who are noticing and commenting on it because they're like, in every other area, Obi usually makes the right decision, but here...
This could have been a full-on diplomatic incident 10 years ago.
I also just like the establishment of Mace's personality, like where he goes, this information stays here, like that means here, like not even to the Chancellor, and like and Yoda thinks about it and agrees, but Mace is just like, this is what we're doing.
Yeah,
I like the difference between their thought process.
Yeah, he's definitely sure of himself on that one. And
the big difference
you can see why
is
he's the Master of the Order, or was before he handed it back.
It's the big difference between how they act. Yoda thinks like a politician, whereas Mace thinks like a military strategist. So it's like compartmentalization of
go ahead.
Okay. Mace is focused on compartmentalization of information, whereas Yoda's thinking we need to touch bases with Palpatine.
Yeah, he weighs the consequences, I think Mace did, and came to the conclusion it didn't matter to him. Like, this is what we're doing. And Yoda takes a little longer. I just like that.
Yeah, it helps define their
It's established in the following chapters that Mace knew that there could be political fallout. He just didn't care.
Yeah, which is so in line with him. Mm-hmm. And it's the right decision as well, because obviously if this chair had gone to Palpatine, that would have been bad. But yeah, that's a nice little discussion between them, highlighting them as Mace is brought into the story. And then we have the last chapter, chapter 18. Last chapter of part 1, we should say, that we're covering today, with Grievous and kind of musing on his creation, so to speak.
Chilling in his little sleep pod.
Because he doesn't sleep. He just kind of goes into sort of a hibernative state with the help of his chair.
Well, at this point, he's full on like
pod
It's like full on Vader stand-in at this point. Like that's like Vader,
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's a perfect demonstration of the fact that the Revenge of the Sith novelization doesn't refer to Grievous as a cyborg. It refers to him as a bio-droid. And that's what Grievous is. At this point, he's basically just a droid with an organic brain instead of a CPU. And this is something that even he himself is in denial about, even though he's not going to sleep. He's basically just... the Borg going into his recharge cycle.
Yeah, you get the kind of conflict of or contrast of his views where he's, the flesh is weak, make me into this thing. I'm talking about this in his past with Hill. But at the same time, he has got that kind of connection to his past and that, he doesn't want to be a fully droid. He resents the cybernetics in terms of needing them, but he acknowledges still that that they are enhancements. I like the kind of contrast, and it's not a conflict, but there is a contrast in his thought process here.
It's also interesting how Grievous kind of tries to get around this whole idea of how he's basically a droid by being vain and putting a lot of aesthetic details on his armor. But the thing that's so interesting about it is that all of these aesthetic details are literally just practically two-dimensional surface details. They're just plates. He's got an armor-plast plate that's just been molded to resemble a skull. It's like everything about him is just like he's trying to superficially resemble who and what he was, but that's all it is, and that's all it'll ever be, superficial.
One thing I particularly like about this sequence is how it kind of plays with perspective, in the sense that Grievous is really disturbed by the fact that he was almost killed by a shuttle crash, that was an accident. He hates that he almost died to an accident, except if you read the Visionaries book that shows Grievous's origin, spoiler warning, it wasn't an accident. but he doesn't know that. So I really like how they kind of play with that perspective. It kind of makes him almost a little bit more tragic, which is ironic.
He's another one of those guys who never would have become what he was if the Sith hadn't decided to intervene and fuck him up because they had a use for him. And that's kind of the saddest thing about it. At the end of the day, in the Star Wars universe, no one is truly safe from the Sith. If they have any kind of a use for you, they won't just they'll manipulate you from a distance, but the second they're able, they'll frickin' slap a shock collar around your neck and say, "You're mine."
And I like that like you said, Evan, there, the idea of him not wanting to lose that warrior's death as his way out. It's calling forth to the foreground, that sense of honor and warrior's mentality that he has. It's always, every time we have Grievous in the foreground in this book, he's a contrast, or it's a discussion on the contrast of actions, between his military mind, his warrior mentality, and his yearning for the past of Hux. Not really a contrast, I guess. It
also makes known the fact that he had several wives and many children, which I always kind of viewed as kind of like a missed story opportunity. It's like it would have been interesting to maybe have like the son or daughter of Grievous like appear in a future story. I don't know, that just would have been
one of my favorite ideas is the idea that even though Grievous is now an inhuman cyborg, one of the ways he tries to hold on to his humanity is he still tries to be present in his children's life as their father. And it's like, how are their kids reacting to their dad being this skeletal monstrosity?
Worst Father's Day ever.
Interesting what if, I guess. I'm not sure how I would feel about having any relevance to his character, though, and coming in. It feels like more one of those things that a story doesn't need telling, personally. But I can see the kind of interesting idea behind it.
For some reason, I thought his family was dead.
I thought his family was dead as well, but I assume
was his
on this one.
What? Were they dead? I can't remember.
I don't know if it was established in this book, but I thought I read somewhere that they were dead.
From what never mind.
From what I remember with Grievous's backstory is that his original companion was a fellow Kaleesh warrior who fought at his side as basically his right-hand man against the Hook invasion of their homeworld, and then she died in battle, and he basically got super distraught, went insane, and just went on a warpath against the Kaleesh while trying to fill the void by having lots of wives, lots of children, but then realizing that's like, no, I'm so empty and my family doesn't matter to me. So I suppose the idea of him being him having a relationship with his family doesn't go anywhere because he almost explicitly states that they just can't fill that hole in him. So it's...
Well, never mind then.
Yeah.
Well, never mind then seems the best way to summarize that little tangent.
Yeah.
But Antoine, Matt, any closing thoughts on this chapter before we wrap up?
I thought it was a really good backstory for him, but we are trying to wrap up, so I'm not going to go full on with that. Read it, people. Read it, it's good.
Yeah.
Antoine?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. All right, in that case, those are our thoughts on part 1 of Labyrinth of Evil. Let us know in the comments what you think. Anything that we haven't explored to the amount you would have liked. Any other comments we've not even brought up at all, let us know in the comment section below. We've enjoyed this. Thank you very much. I'm Retty4, and I still don't have an outro.
Gensarai 1 signing off.
Sorry, I missed my cue. Agent 91. Bye.
Oh, yeah. Evan Nova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Antoine Bandele, peace, love, and may the force be with you always.
Goodbye.